Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, are big changes in store at the Federal Reserve. Just days after policymakers voted to hold interest rates steady, reports Fed Chair Kevin Warsh may want to scale back the number of Fed meetings.
New this morning, states leading the charge. A bipartisan group of governors sitting down with Bloomberg this weekend for an exclusive announcement on immigration.
We all care, Republicans and Democrats, about a secure border. We all care about safety and security of our states and our nation, and we all care about the economy.
And a FIFA flip. President Gianni Infantino ditches a plan to open the World Cup to outside investment after a revolt by some of soccer's biggest clubs. Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, coming to you live from Bloomberg's World Headquarters here in New York City. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. It is Saturday, August 1st. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across all our Bloomberg platforms on radio, TV, streaming on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. We have Tim Stenovec joining us today in for Lisa Mateo, and we've got quite a few headlines this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a busy week for markets, busy week in the Middle East as well. We had this cabinet meeting that took place at Camp David yesterday, Christina, in which the president talked about his plans for Iran. Still a lot of ambiguity there. And our focus also on Ukraine this morning as well. A massive attack there by the Russians on Ukraine overnight.
That's right. Let's turn to Tim for the headlines. Tim, what you got?
Hey, good morning, guys. President Trump has reportedly ordered a new attack on Iran as soon as this weekend. That's according to a report in the Wall Street Journal. Citing unnamed officials, the president cast doubt on continuing negotiations with Tehran during a cabinet meeting at Camp David yesterday.
They're being decimated. They have no Navy, they have no Air Force, they have no anti-aircraft. Doesn't mean they don't have any capability.
And this morning, Kuwait says its air defenses detected and destroyed Iranian drones in its airspace. CBS News is reporting the U.S. is considering strikes on Iran's energy infrastructure. Advocacy groups say deliberately targeting civilian targets could be considered war crimes. And Hamas has confirmed it will disarm as part of a deal that President Trump announced this week. The agreement also calls on Israel to end its strikes and withdraw from Gaza. Israel has yet to comment on the deal, but the president says he expects it will be implemented.
So we do have an understanding with Israel. Israel is very happy about it. Israel helped us. And they've been very good. They've been very good about it. Most people said that would be a deal that would be undoable. Now, will it go through its ups and downs? It's a very complex situation over there. The people are very complex.
Hamas also says it will give up its heavy weapons on condition of the creation of a Palestinian state. And overnight, Russia launched an intense barrage of drones and ballistic missiles in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Authorities say at least 9 people were killed and 30 others injured. The strikes come 2 days after another major Russian attack across Ukraine, as Moscow apparently looks to exploit Kyiv's shortage of Western-supplied anti-missile defenses. And the death toll has climbed to 67 in Spain's border crisis in its North African territory of Ceuta. About 60,000 migrants crossed into the territory from neighboring Morocco in the span of about 24 hours. Spain's government says about half the migrants have returned voluntarily. The government plans to install a containment barrier along a breakwater fence that the migrants breached. And in France, firefighters are working to put out the last hotspots of a wildfire that's burned an area 4 times the size of Paris in Bordeaux's Gironde region. Officials say lower temperatures and higher humidity overnight are easing the pressure on fire crews. Meanwhile, strong winds are fanning dozens of places across Greece today. They've burned houses and forced evacuations in coastal areas northwest of Athens. David and Christina.
Tim, thank you very much. I mean, this is a huge story. It has been all week, and I know you come from out west. There are some residents as well from what we've seen. I was in Colorado a few weeks back, massive fires across Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, in the western U.S., at least, it's always been part of the summers, but now the summers are extending, the warmer weather is extending, and the fire season is extending, and it's hitting Europe, too. Yeah.
And Ukraine overnight announced they're sending firefighters to France. Probably a thank you for Macron's strong support in that war. All right, thanks, Tim.
Thanks.
Stocks ended a chaotic week and month on Friday as investors weighed big tech earnings and the decision-making at the Fed under the guidance of new chairman Kevin Warsh.
New York Times is reporting that Warsh may be considering cutting down the number of committee meetings each year, undoing decades of precedent. With us in studio to analyze all of this is Michael McKee, Bloomberg's international economics and policy correspondent, and Jonathan Golub, chief equity strategist at Seaport Research Partners. Great to have both of you with us. Mike, let me start with this report from the New York Times. Colby Smith, Ben Castleman reporting last night, citing 4 officials involved in the meeting that took place over the course of the last week here. Mr. Warsh raised the idea of changing the frequency of FOMC meetings at the Fed's gathering this week. Warsh left the impression that a revised schedule could be decided on before the next meeting in mid-September, even if the changes would not be carried out until later. Obviously, lots of knock-on effects here. You would travel to Washington less. The market would get less information.
Fewer seller points. It's very unfortunate.
Talk to us a bit about the ramifications of this. This is a new Fed chair who has not made a secret of the fact that he wants to change the way in which the Fed communicates. What would it mean for folks like you who cover the institution, for markets, for economists as well?
Well, for people who cover the institution, it's not going to make a big difference. But the question is, why do you want to do this? The Fed went to 8 meetings a year during the Volcker years, and so it's become the pattern that markets and companies are used to. And if you have fewer meetings, you would have fewer opportunities to at least have a planned move in the markets. I mean, you can always do a surprise move, but unless you really want to surprise people, and I don't know why you would, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me on the top. Now, I haven't talked to Kevin about this, but,
sure,
but I would like to. But for people who are in the markets, companies who are making spending plans, having fewer opportunities to see where interest rates are going is not going to be good. It's less planning, less efficient. So I'm not exactly sure what he thinks he's going to get out of this.
Jonathan, what's your take on that? Because, I mean, legally, they're only required to do 4 per year. Is that all that's really necessary? Or, you know, as Mike was talking about, this is a time when people are looking for stability. Why throw any kind of disruption into the system?
Well, it's very parallel to the conversation we're having in equity land about having, you know, companies not reporting quarterly, reporting semi-annually. And when people ask them about it, it's the same thing. Give me a company that's going to go from 4 reports a year to 2, and I'll give you a company whose stock price is down. The market does not like the additional uncertainty, or the moves are going to be more clumpy. You're going to have, if the Fed wants to raise or lower rates, they're going to have to move less frequency in bigger amounts. The speculation around that goes up, the volatility goes up, and the value of assets, whether it be equities or bonds, is lower in that kind of an environment.
Jonathan, we're going to talk about earnings. I know you want to talk about that, but let's talk about the distinction that we saw in stark relief this week when the Fed chair was talking to reports. So there's forward guidance, and then there's kind of clarity on what the reaction function is of this Fed. What were your impressions as you watched and listened to the Fed chair this week? We saw markets react strongly to what was happening, yes, more so in the fixed income space, but what did you make of the way that he's approached the position there in that second meeting?
So, you know, my take on how important the Fed is different as an equity guy. What matters most in order of importance is not short rates, but number one is, what is a credit spread? What is our belief that companies are going to make good on their debt payments? And in the last few days of the month, credit spreads substantially widened out, which meant that the market sees greater risk. The second thing is, what is the long end of the curve doing? And that steepened out further. So putting aside what I thought about the short end of the curve, which really doesn't matter, the long end of the curve and credit spreads were a really big negative for stocks.
Mike, I want to ask you, last time you were here, we were talking about how it was Warsh's first big meeting and holding everybody together, and there seemed to be some consensus, but he said he was open to having these debates, and we're going to play you some sound about what he said about possible family fighting.
I asked for a good family fight, and I got one. Most of our discussion were on the big questions that matter to the conduct of monetary policy. We didn't sort of hide from them. We weren't scared of them. There was a lot more interaction between and among my colleagues. It was a real family fight. That's the better way to get policy right. That's our North Star.
But for now, they're holding rates steady. Does that fight get a little more cantankerous if they decide to actually change policy? And can he navigate that?
Well, I'm not sure what he means by a family fight. This isn't La Cosa Nostra. It's not. It's
One would hope.
Not whacking.
I mean, my last name is Ruffini, so thank you for making a reference. I understand. Carry on.
But because they have these discussions every meeting,
Yeah.
and they've been doing it for decades.
It's part of the gig, right?
Yeah. And yes, there's probably more arguments now because Warsh wants to make a lot of changes. But the real issue is who's on what side. And at this point, it looks like there are more and more people at each meeting who are thinking about wanting to raise rates. We got the late story from the FT yesterday that Alberto Musalem believes as they do. And we know that Jeff Schmidt believes as they do. So you've got 6 people at least who are at this point thinking that maybe you need to raise rates, which will drive market trading between now and September 18th. The data that we get will probably be more important, but people are going to be discussing this, and that creates volatility, as Jonathan was saying, that the markets don't like.
Let's move to earnings if we can. The Fed, a huge component of this week, but a lot to make us exhausted and prompt us to exhale here on this Saturday morning. So, Jonathan, we've had all of this agita about AI. What's this spending leading to? And so from the companies that reported this week, and there was this stark divide between those who seem to be making money and making hay out of all of the investments they've made and those who haven't. What clarity did you get on that question of whether or not there is reason to be concerned or worried about how many billions of dollars are going into this space right now?
Well, I mean, let's frame what earnings season looks like. This is by far the best earnings season ever in history.
Outside of tech, across the board.
No. Forget about tech.
Yeah.
It is the best earnings season we've ever had, except in periods where you're bouncing out of a recession and you're comparing against, broken numbers. So just to put things in perspective, overall, earnings are expected right now to be up 50% compared to a year ago. I can't even describe how insane that is. I think in the post-pandemic period, the average has been 9.5% growth. Some of that is funky things that are happening with the numbers related to, passive investments in AI companies. If you strip those out, you're left at 30%. But let's talk about the real big surprises. We went into earnings season. The banks were expected to grow less than 8%. Right now, the expectations are the banks are going to finish with 22%. The oil companies related to the war in the Middle East, well over 100% on earnings growth, and for the most part, the rest of the universe outside of tech is fine. So it's huge. A lot of this, however, is related to the same thing. Why the banks are making money? Because they're lending into, there's more capital markets activity and the like. So there is one big ecosystem around this stuff.
One quick follow-up here just about kind of the integrity of the so-called Magnificent Seven. Again, I brought up that kind of divide in terms of how these companies are doing. Is that still a useful kind of categorization for you? Is the Magnificent Seven dead, I guess, is my stark question.
I don't know if you would define the most important.
Slightly less magnificent.
Well, no, not even slightly. I mean, if you take a look, like the average company in the S&P is expected to grow 12 is 12.
Yeah.
And the overall is 50, as I said. So there's a huge bias by these big tech companies. But you'd have to throw other names in there. Broadcom, you'd say, well, does that really belong part of the pack? Probably. Right now, in terms of companies that are most important, would you throw Micron in the memory company? So it's a slightly broader list of those, but it's still mega cap tech is the horse that's pulling the wagon.
Yeah.
Mike, I thought about you yesterday when we were interviewing these governors, not just because they were wearing excellent hats, but because they were talking about task forces. And this has been a big thing where she's got all kinds of task forces. And you asked him about one specifically when it comes to the AI question. We're going to play some sound.
What vetting did you do of the people that you appointed to the task forces? In particular, given Mark Andreessen's substantial political spending, $25 million in just the past year to back candidates who oppose stricter AI regulation, how can the public be confident that a committee he co-chairs will provide an independent assessment of AI's economic effects rather than one aligned with the interests of the AI industry?
Yeah, so I selected 15 incredible subject matter experts to tackle 5 of the most important questions that if we get the answers right, we're going to do a far better job in delivering. And if we get the answers wrong, we have a problem. The comfort that I can give you and your listeners is we're the decision makers. The chairman of the board of the Federal Reserve and the members of the board and the FOMC, we will be the consumers of the outputs from 5 different committees. The judgments we're making will be informed by, but not at all determined by these outside groups.
Was that a satisfactory answer to quell some of the criticism here?
It's probably the only answer he could give because obviously Andreessen comes into it with a point of view. And they're going to get that point of view. And he basically said, we know that we're going to get that point of view. Now, you have to also know that Mark Andreessen is a longtime friend of Kevin Warsh's. They went to school together at Stanford. So that's another reason that he would be on the committee. But it's a little less worrisome in the AI space because it's not something the Fed really regulates, or it's more like, how could this affect the economy? But it's still a question when you have somebody who is so blatantly on one side of an issue of what kind of advice they're going to be given. Warsh says, I know that.
Jonathan, you mentioned sort of the activity we've seen in capital markets, and we had the SpaceX IPO, we had the ADR of SK Hynix. How are you feeling about the prospects of the other companies going forward? We had a couple of consumer IPOs this week and kind of branching out, as we've been talking about here, beyond just these big tech names.
It's a really big deal. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not only an AI story. This is a CapEx story and a capital raise story. The amount of money that's being spent is extraordinary, and companies need to raise that capital from somewhere. And the market at some point in time gets really uncomfortable with that. I mean, companies in many cases are raising money that they don't even need given their cash flows, because right now the capital markets are open, but bond investors are looking at this and saying, am I going to get an appropriate return? In many cases, you have a data center that is a 15-year life, and that's a really long commitment to make on technology for a couple hundred basis points over Treasury yields. Michael, I just a question for you as it relates to this Warsh conversation. Is now the time right out of the gate to be talking about procedures when there's all this debate? Inflation is higher, budget deficits are higher, oil prices are higher. They're soliciting Congress for more budget, budgets, and then you're talking about how many committees you're having and how many meetings you're having. Is it tone deaf? And does the market look at that and say, look, are you listening to what the debate should be?
As Alberto Musalem put it to the FT, Mr. Market is sending a message that they don't like this. The chair has come out, the new chair has come out and said over and over and over again that our goal is to bring down inflation and we're going to get to the 2% target. But then all he's talking about are these task forces, and it's almost as if they invented the Fed right when his first meeting was. It's not like the Fed hasn't been talking about all of this stuff and what needs to be done. And if the rest of the committee doesn't have views on this, for some time now, for years perhaps. So I'm not sure why I can understand why he wants to do something at the beginning of his term, but why to make that front and center as opposed to monetary policy?
Great to have both of you with us. Really appreciate this. Michael McKee, our Chief International Economics and International Policy Economics Correspondent, and Jonathan Golub of Seaport Research Partners joining us here on set in New York.
Excellent question. You can come have my job next time.
No.
I'll get a coffee.
Great to see you both.
No, it's excellent. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, coming up, the war in Iran reports that President Trump is preparing a major escalation as that conflict enters a sixth month. The counter threat from Iran putting Gulf allies at risk. And in our next hour, an important announcement from the heads of the National Governors Association about immigration policy. That's kind of at 8 o'clock Eastern on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Radio, television, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Tim Stenovec. Let's update you on some of today's top stories. In Arizona, authorities have released an early ransom note in the disappearance of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie's mother. A second note was also released yesterday, saying Nancy Guthrie died shortly after she was kidnapped and is, quote, buried in nature. Today marks 6 months since the 84-year-old was last seen at her home outside Tucson. Authorities hope someone will recognize the writing style in the notes. The Marine Corps says a pilot who ejected from an F-35B stealth fighter before it crashed is expected to live. The jet went down yesterday near Miramar Air Base in San Diego, which used to host the Navy training school depicted in Top Gun. A Marine statement called the crash a Class A mishap. It's the most severe category for damage worth more than $2 million. And the Justice Department is dropping its criminal case against David Hearn, the former Olympic canoeist charged with deliberately damaging the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Government lawyers say new information shows that the damage to the pool's lining was caused by flawed installation by the contractor. Hearn's lawyers say the case should never have been brought. David and Christina.
This is a wild twist to the story. Janine Pirro, U.S. Attorney, came out, made this announcement. Really,
on a Friday afternoon.
Yes.
Evening,
Friday news dump.
Friday news dump. But what's interesting here is kind of the interplay between her, the Justice Department, and the Interior Department, because she really threw them under the bus, saying, prosecutors went to the reflecting pool, ascertained very quickly here that where the cuts were made, he couldn't have gotten there. So now she's like, we didn't get the right information from the Interior Department.
So does this mean the pool's going to get fixed?
Well, it's empty again, isn't it? You've been there more recently than I.
I didn't make it over there. It drained, but then there's been a lot of storms in Washington. It keeps refilling, so they can't fix it until the raining stops.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it, I say.
But all right, thanks,
there we go. Tim, thank you very much. The White House preparing for large-scale attacks in Iran soon. That's what the president said at a cabinet meeting at Camp David yesterday.
We'll be hitting them. We'll be hitting them very hard. And, at some point they're going to say, we just can't take it anymore. They're being decimated. They have no Navy, they have no Air Force, they have no anti-aircraft. Doesn't mean they don't have any capability.
Reporting that this is likely to be a joint operation between the U.S. and Israel. Israel likely going to take part in those strikes. However, they haven't happened yet. So to talk about possibly why, joining us now from the region is Bloomberg's Middle East reporter Dan Williams, who is in Jerusalem. Dan, I don't know what you're hearing this morning, but I checked in with some sources in Jerusalem, and they were at the beach this morning. They've been told that possibly this 24-hour warning timeline for more strikes has been pushed back, and one of the reasons is this agreement with Hamas. So can you tell us what's going on there and if you think that's impacting the timeline?
Well, if your sources, when they're not wearing bathing suits or wearing military uniforms, it's worth pointing out the beach is only about a 12 or 15-minute drive from military headquarters in Tel Aviv. Presumably, they could be dressed and back in action at short notice. The Israelis say they have been poised to resume their war on Iran if asked to by the United States or if attacked directly by Iran. So beach or not, I think the Israelis, if indeed these leaked reports to American media are true, would be ready to pitch in very short order. And we shouldn't rule out a resumption of that war. Significantly, I think these reports have emerged just a couple days after the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu returned from a much-watched visit to Washington. There was some speculation at the outset that sparks would fly between him and the US President Trump, given their quite public divisions over the course of the war in recent weeks and months. There was certainly no evidence of that during the meeting. And we may discover, if these leaks prove true, that if anything, they were there to decide jointly on the next course of action, on the resumption of joint military action against Iran. It's worth remembering that previous meeting on February 11th came just over 2 weeks before that war was launched on February 28th. Anything can go, but as you noted, in parallel, there has been a development, declarative nonetheless, but still dramatic in Gaza. Gaza is the ground zero of this multi-front regional war that Israel's been waging for 2.5 years. Arguably, the United States would not now be at war with Iran were it not for Hamas, that Iranian-Palestinian ally attacking Israel on October 7, 2023. And unfurling that regional conflict. It now appears Hamas has declaratively, nominally agreed to disarm. There is a bit of a hedging to that statement. Nonetheless, it's a significant step forward. It's being held as such by international mediators, by the international consortium known as the Board of Peace, that's meant to implement President Trump's vision for post-war reconstruction and reconciliation in Gaza and between Gaza and Israel. That's definitely worth watching, though the Israelis have been quietly expressing misgivings. We'll be watching tomorrow when Netanyahu convenes his cabinet to see if there's a formal acceptance of what's being called the roadmap into the Trump peace plan.
We'll get back to what the president is calling an historic agreement here in just a minute, Dan, but I want to stick with the visit that Prime Minister Netanyahu made to Washington. You were along on that trip as well, and I should say concision was the name of the game in terms of official readouts of that meeting in the White House. But Prime Minister Netanyahu did speak to ABC News afterward. Let's take a listen to what he had to say just about what he and the president discussed.
He's got basically three options. One, to indeed succeed in making a deal. Two, to continue the blockade. Three, to take military action. Anything that will produce the end of Iran's nuclear program is what we want. That's our common goal. We actually analyzed all three possibilities, and I thought we did it in an open way between friends and allies, and it's his decision.
Dan, we hear the Prime Minister there underscoring the friendship between him and the President of the United States, talking about the analysis that the both of them did during that meeting in the White House. How closely aligned are they? You mentioned that cabinet meeting taking place tomorrow. Your sense of sort of what's likely to come about it vis-a-vis this conflict?
If you're referring to Gaza, Netanyahu's in a bind. He's up for re-election in some 3 months. This Gaza plan calls for an Israeli withdrawal as part of the decommissioning of Hamas arms. And the interim plan, the problem with the Gaza plan is published by Trump in October of last year, when the ceasefire in Gaza was achieved, was that the only real detail was over the return of hostages, the increase in humanitarian aid, and the cessation of major combat. Everything else was very much bare bones, broad brush, if you like. Now we're approaching the small print, and the small print is meant to bring together sides that really don't want to be brought together. That's especially true for Hamas. It's an existential situation for Hamas. It faces destruction one way or the other, and it's trying to salvage what it can. So it's saying it won't withdraw, or I should say, sorry, won't give up its weapons without an Israeli withdrawal, without an Israeli commitment to Palestinian statehood. All of that is in the Trump plan. The question is scope and sequencing. Hamas is trying to front load this deal, its agreement to give up some of its weapons, heavy weapons, not small arms at this point, to major concessions by Israel. That really isn't borne out by a reading of the Trump plan. But if you, and certainly not by statements by the US president himself, he said a withdrawal would follow a decommissioning, a demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. Nonetheless, everyone involved here, I imagine even the Israelis, so Netanyahu may not want to say that publicly, don't want this effort to die. It is significant. They don't want it to wither on the vine. So Netanyahu has to thread the needle between keeping this initiative going, keeping Hamas on the road to disarmament, while not alienating his right-wing allies and his electorate with obvious moves that could be construed as Israeli withdrawal, Israeli redeployment, and Israel not itself receiving the weapons that Hamas plans to give up. Under the plans published this week, Hamas would effectively put them in escrow. Decommissioning meaning they put them in storage, out of reach officially, but under the control of a future recognized and verified and approved Palestinian administration. I think many Israelis had images of piles of rifles being picked up in the middle of the street, loaded onto the back of Israeli trucks. That's not going to happen.
Dan, are you going to get your take on this? Because as you mentioned, Israel has not officially commented on this deal yet. The other thing that stands out to me is you mentioned sequencing. There is a bit of a sequencing here because you get this Gaza announcement after you had this Saudi nuclear agreement get agreed to, and then you had President Trump come out and say they can't have the nuclear deal until they normalize relationship with Gaza. The Saudi Crown Prince has said he can't do that until there's a deal for the Palestinians. Do we think this is all tied in, that all of a sudden we're getting a push on normalization here or a solution for the Gaza issue?
It well could be. There are people in the US administration, there are people in the Israeli government who are thinking big picture. Again, I think the immediate need or the immediate desire of any of the people, the stakeholders, would be to achieve actual peace or an abating of these hostilities, but there would be a political payoff, an electoral payoff. As I said, Netanyahu's up for re-election. The US president is looking at midterms in November. If he could bring a ceremony, a signing ceremony, or a handshake ceremony on the White House lawns to those elections, it could help him, though invariably such elections come down to domestic policy. It wouldn't hurt him, given that he really is adrift in this Iran war, at least to be able to hold up a peace deal to counterbalance that in terms of the imaging of his foreign policy, his handling of foreign affairs. So there may be something tied together here. I think what we've seen with Trump is he does like coming out with the major declarations of achievements, even though they haven't been fully signed onto by all the parties. I think he likes to will the achievement into reality by basically, should we say, corralling people publicly into either going along what he's declared or publicly defying him. That may be the case in Gaza when it comes to the Saudi nuclear deal that you cited. The Israelis weren't happy with its announcement. They felt that they weren't properly consulted on it at this stage. As you noted, the US president said after the announcement, some hours or I think a day later, that the Saudis would have to recognize Israel. Much comes down to whether they will actually be able in the future under this deal to enrich uranium. That is not an immediate part of the deal. That's what all sides will focus on.
Dan, great to speak with you as always. Dan Williams, our Middle East reporter based in Jerusalem. And I should say, coming up here, we're going to talk to David Remnick of The New Yorker about the election coming up in Israel as well. So do stay tuned for that, Dan. Thanks again.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, rising youth unemployment in India has sparked what's being called the Cockroach movement. It's managed to oust a cabinet minister and is presenting a growing challenge to Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Bloomberg Originals looks at how these protests are changing Indian politics.
For over a decade, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his party have dominated Indian politics.
Narendra Modi secures a third term.
Modi's BJP wins control of the Indian capital.
But that dominant political vehicle hit a bit of a roadblock.
The police has barricaded the street and put internet jammers in place. In total, there would have been tens of thousands of protesters converging on the parliament.
And it went on for weeks, but was triggered by an internet meme featuring, well, look.
CJP! Cockroach की सरकार बनाना युवा को रोजगार मिलेगा अब बदलेगा देश का सिस्टम
Cockroach movement. That's a rather weird name for a popular movement, isn't it?
It is, particularly considering that anger isn't directed at the government's pest control record, but its education department and some recent exam scandals.
The unemployment situation in India is fairly grim. These degrees, diplomas and certificates are not enough.
In late July, the movement scored a win.
The country's education minister has resigned after protests over exam paper leaks.
Toppling a minister, though, doesn't fix a youth job crisis that's only being compounded by artificial intelligence. With major elections looming, Modi isn't just fighting political rivals now. He's facing a threat to India's status quo, marching under the banner of a six-legged mascot.
Waterbugs.
All right, water bugs, yes, cockroaches.
We were just saying whether they're cockroaches or water bugs. I think water bugs is just a more palatable name for the same thing.
We're going to get more intel on what's been happening here. Maybe we can dive into sort of the naming of this as well. Coming up here, we're going to live report from New Delhi looking at what happens next with this protest movement. There's a lot of concern here about members of that protest group being arrested, which runs counter to the deal that they brokered with the Indian government and raise the specter that maybe there could be more protests to come here. So,
and what you do with an unhappy and very young population who needs employment and needs to feel like they have opportunity.
A challenge that Mr. Modi has not faced here.
Exactly right.
Yeah. All right. That's coming up here on Bloomberg This Weekend on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. Stay with us.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Tim Stenovec. Let's update you on today's top stories. FIFA president Gianni Infantino has abandoned a controversial plan to create a commercial entity that would have opened the door to outside investors in the World Cup, just days after unveiling the proposal. The reversal comes just after Europe's governing football body, UEFA, vowed to boycott the tournament if FIFA went ahead with the plan. UEFA released a statement this morning saying it has lost confidence in Infantino's leadership. The Big Ten and Southeastern conferences agreed last night to support a Senate bill to regulate college sports. This after receiving concessions over language regarding third-party name, image, likeness deals. The bill still needs 60 votes to halt debate and head to an up or down vote before the Senate leaves for summer break. That's next Friday. And former Republican Congressman George Santos has agreed to pay more than $35,000 to settle allegations that he manipulated a wager on the prediction market Kalshi. Santos had been the subject of an event contract where users bet yes or no on whether he would attend the State of the Union address. Santos himself placed wagers on both sides of the trade. He also agreed to a 3-year trading ban. David and Christina.
George Santos did not like my dress.
Did not like, yes, I forgot. We should put that disclosure in here.
Yep.
This is a controversial...
So it looked like I was wearing 2 trash bags.
I thought we were going to talk about prediction markets.
Well, we'll get there, but you engaged with the congressman.
Well, I mean, I did. He said, doesn't she have any friends to tell her she looks terrible? This looks like 2 trash bags. And I said, well, the last part is true, but I do have some friends. And he thought that was amusing. And then we had like a nice exchange because I tried to take it with some good humor.
Are these companies cracking down on this in any way? I gather that George Santos, I think, was at an airport bar when he sent out that.
Wait, really?
Yes.
I missed that part of the story.
Because they're regulated by the CFTC, they're responsible for
self-certification.
Interesting. So they're doing their own enforcement. And we're actually going to be speaking to Robert Denault, who's head of enforcement and legal at Kalshi, next week on Bloomberg Business Week Daily, our afternoon show.
You see that?
Look at that. Slid that little self-promotion right in there.
We're going to be talking about this quite a bit.
All right, very good. Tim Stenovec.
We'll use some of that on the show. Or you can just come back. Thanks, Tim.
Appreciate that. All right, we're going to get back to that rising youth unemployment in India, which has sparked student-led Cockroach movement, which has managed to oust a cabinet minister while presenting a growing challenge to Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
The protests highlight the extent to which India's economic rise is failing to include young, unemployed graduates, with many feeling their lives and futures are being ignored by the governing party. Joining us now is Bloomberg News senior reporter Dan Strump. Dan, the most interesting thing to me is the catalyst for all of this seems to have been a set of leaked test answers. Can you please explain why that mattered and how that got us here?
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So what was the catalyst in all of this was actually a series of leaked what's known in India as exam papers. Essentially, it's the early leak of the actual test itself that was circulating among some students, and essentially forced the government to invalidate a huge number of the one of the most competitive tests in India, which is the test to get into medical school. Now, this affects hundreds of thousands of students, if not more. It's a highly sought after sort of pathway for high achievers in India, widely seen as kind of a way out of poverty. And it really at the time shook the confidence in the nation's education system, which for a long time has been having trouble really funneling its many young educated students into well-paying jobs. So all of this has kind of come to a head in the last couple of months in the form of this movement that we have seen that has taken to the streets and, as you said, has really shaken the politics of India and forced this rare retreat by the government in the form of the resignation of the education minister and, calls for this group to kind of carry on its mandate to keep pushing and keep calling for reform.
We were chatting about the name of the group, and for us New Yorkers, cockroaches have one connotation. I gather there's a satirical connotation there in India. Explain that if you would. This is the CJP versus the BJP, which is the ruling party, which is helmed by Narendra Modi. Explain the joke if you would, and maybe tell us just a bit about how cohesive this group of young people is.
Yeah, so it is a satirical movement. It started as a sort of a joke among some young people. It is a play on the ruling party, the BJP. What they're calling themselves is the CJP, the Cockroach Janta Party. And it essentially stemmed from what was kind of an offhand remark some months back by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of India, sort of dismissively referring to unemployed young people as kind of cockroaches of society with nothing better to do but sort of disrupt things and cause trouble. Now, this did not go well. This did not go down well among some young people, and they started sort of joking on it online on Twitter. A sort of riff began to circulate, and this joke essentially metamorphized into what became what they're calling themselves a political party. It's still not officially that. It's a movement of sorts, but it's this movement around this sense of aggrievement, this sense of disenfranchisement among young people, that the system is sort of not working for them, that the education system is not working for them, that the economy is not working for them, that they're not getting the jobs that they need, and that the establishment, the political class in India, isn't listening to them, and worse, is mocking them and sort of dismissing them as cockroaches. So they've sort of taken on this mantle and have kind of are sort of wearing it proudly. And you really see, in the form of some of those videos you just showed, embracing this sort of cockroach mantle and taking it forward.
Just want to say, Christina, Dan wins the show thus far. We're talking about the cockroach movement. He has the Kafka-esque metamorphosis reference there to the way this group has developed. You're in the lead, Dan. You're in the leaderboard thus far.
All right,
that was an entirely unintentional.
Incidental, I'm sure.
Now that you mention it, it does sound great.
Totally derailed my train of thought, but I did want to talk to you about who is going to these protests. I've been listening to some reports on them throughout the weeks, and it seems like it's not just kids anymore. As there were some crackdowns on these protests, I heard of parents and aunties and uncles like showing up to try to show support because, as you mentioned, these tests are really important, but they're kind of the whole family has stake in them, especially if you're from a not well-off family. Those test results are seen as a way to break generations of a cycle of poverty and the amount of pressure that is put on these young people, and then to then allow kind of this malfeasance or these leaked test results. People were just really, really upset about it. Who's going to these protests, and are they specific about what they want?
So it did start off as a sort of very much a student-led protest. The founder of the movement was a student actually studying in the U.S. at the time of Indian descent, was studying at Boston University. He's since come back to help lead the movement here. But it was very much a sort of a movement that started at the grassroots level from students. It has since grown much more widely. I mean, you do see sort of just young people across society joining in the protests. And as you said, many of their family members have also been coming out, because you're absolutely right. For many families, many of these students who are taking the tests, who are hoping to go on to these higher education programs that have come under threat, were the first people in their families to do this. I mean, this is, India remains, a low-income country that puts a lot of priority on education and on the opportunities that education can afford. You're seeing a lot of pathways close off for many young Indians. For example, many who used to go to the U.S. for education or for employment on H-1B visas. Yeah. That was a major pathway for many Indians. Now that's being closed off. So all of these things are kind of coming together, and you do see many more people kind of joining the protests. One big tipping point, I think, has been the way the government initially responded to these protests, which was actually quite a tough crackdown in the form of police coming out into the streets, using batons on some of the protesters, using tear gas, allegations of pellet guns as well being used. And a lot of these images and videos of this sort of this response by the police has circulated widely on social media and really has helped to inflame the movement and actually spread a lot of sympathy, I think, for many of these protesters, which is around the time that you started to really see the movement take off. So it has seen quite a sort of a widespread sympathy, and it's growing. It does show no signs of slowing down.
Dan, great to speak with you. Thank you very much for the update. Dan Strumpf joining us from New Delhi here, our correspondent there. Great to get an update on this, Christina. And
yeah, we'll check back in with Dan. It's such a huge issue, and I don't think we cover that enough, and I don't think we cover India enough, considering the population and how integral it is to the global economy.
And certainly you mentioned the crackdown that we saw, I think it was on July the 20th. I think that's when a lot of people outside of India really woke up and saw the power of this movement, and we'll continue to stick with it.
And Dan makes a good point. It is harder to get those visas to come to American schools and study, and so that's putting even more pressure on the internal system to find places for these people. All right, up next, it is BT Dubs with Tim Stenovec, the one actor who apparently can guarantee a $1 billion blockbuster.
And you can explore live streaming news and interviews, all our Bloomberg TV shows, documentaries, reporting and analysis in one place, Bloomberg.com/videos.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend, or BT Dubs. I'm Christina Ruffini with David Gura. Here's some stories you might have missed this week.
This is a pivotal moment here. We have Tim Stenovec with us.
Yeah, we need to. Tim, what's the tiebreaker? I say BT Dubs. Gura says BTW.
We're going to save it for the news quiz.
Whoa,
the point of
all
news
right,
quiz.
okay.
That's going to show, that's
Why do I feel like this is going to end very badly for me at the end of the show?
He doesn't know yet. He hasn't settled on what he thinks it's called.
Have either of you guys seen The Odyssey yet?
I have not.
We did have Emily Wilson, who wrote the big translation. But no, wait, I haven't seen the movie.
And panned the movies.
So was not happy with that.
The movie's doing pretty well.
Yes.
It's hard to get tickets for the 70mm IMAX.
I looked to go to the 70mm IMAX at Lincoln Square, and it is sold out through August.
Yeah.
And there are showings at 4 a.m. that are sold out.
I saw on Instagram a friend of mine went earlier this week. He got up at 4 a.m. to go to the 6 a.m. showing.
There's no way I would make it through a 3-hour movie at 4 a.m.
It's a giant screen.
The Telegraph is out with a profile of Zendaya, who, if you've seen any of the promotional materials for this, you'd think that she was
star of the movie.
No, she's in for 5 minutes.
Is that right?
Oh, I didn't know that.
5 minutes. She plays the gray-eyed goddess Athena, if you remember from your high school Odyssey days.
I did. I read the Robert Fagel's translation.
And she has just this star power nowadays that attracts
she's
viewers,
giving Athena.
Money.
She's just gorgeous.
She's got almost 200 million followers on Instagram.
Slightly more than you.
I have no retort for that. Yeah. By the end of the year, her 3 main projects, The Odyssey, Spider-Man Brand New Day, and Dune Part 3, are projected to make over $1 billion each at the box office.
One of the things she's really good at, though, as we play these red carpet videos, is she works with stylist La Roche, and they plan years in advance for these premieres and what she's going to wear. And they are very, curated, constructed. They're always on theme, and so they go super viral. So that probably does help her, because the fits, as the youths would say, are amazing.
The Telegraph story points this out. That's a huge part of her following.
She's married? She's getting married?
She's married.
Spider-Man!
And apparently, in the UK, they're sort of looked at as the opposite of Travis and Tyler.
Taylor.
Taylor and Travis.
Yes, Tim Stenovec noted.
Was not invited to the wedding.
Was not at the wedding.
Okay.
Clearly not.
All right, let's get to something I know. Let's get to something someone I know a little more about, and that would be.
I will see the movie.
Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson. The
Willie
great Willie
Nelson.
Nelson. 93 years young.
Willie Nelson.
And he's still touring.
Yes.
He's got an amphitheater tour this summer. You can actually go see him.
Like upstate, I think.
Upstate, you can go see him on Long Island. I think he's playing in Jones Beach.
I have seen him.
Somebody you would see.
I saw him in Forest Hills. It was a double billing with.
That's a great show.
God, I can't remember who it was with, but it's Van Morrison. But I thought they'd play together. They didn't play together.
Oh.
So it was Willie Nelson and then
All right.
Van Morrison. There was a lot of dispute in the amphitheater. Who should have gone first? Like you'd think the headliner maybe should have been Willie Nelson, but it was actually Van Morrison. But we're not going to settle that here. Anyways, I'm sorry to derail this.
That's okay. No, I mean, that's a big part of the conversation, that he still tours. And when he tours, he also makes it known about what he stands for. I mean, he's pushing back right now on data centers. He's out with a post on social media. He calls them loud, thieving, light-polluting hubs that are invading our land. And he's no stranger to sort of making his views known. Last year on a tour, he talked about support for immigrants. He started Farm Aid back in 1985, supporting farmers here in the U.S. He did that along with Neil Young and John Mellencamp. So he's still out there doing his thing.
All right.
I mean, it's interesting as you look at like wide open spaces and how they're seen as an opportunity. You know, they're putting this thing in Inner Mongolia now, which is like one of the pristine landscapes.
New data centers.
But it's open space.
A
and
DeepSeek data center.
Yeah.
DeepSeek.
Have you guys ever gotten a package that was addressed to you?
Okay.
You open it and you have no idea where this thing is from.
This has happened to me before, often from the Amazon Prime
Yes, but this is because my mother can't remember to change her address in our
interesting.
shared Amazon account. And
Oh, she's getting things.
Yeah, she actually sends things to me. But
There are stores popping up in Europe where you can buy stuff that was shipped to other people.
Oh.
And the idea is that it creates this experience that you can't replicate online.
Yeah.
There's sort of a thrill in opening somebody else's package.
Yeah.
And the idea is that like you're kind of a kid again.
It's a bit of a surprise. It's like when you go to the bookstore and you see they have those shelves now of like wrapped books.
Yeah, I do like that
this
game.
or that. Get this book. You're not knowing what it's going to be. So I like that. Bring you got a surprise element to adulthood.
And it's kind of sustainable too. They take returns from people who don't want whatever they ordered.
All right.
That's
this is a Bloomberg Weekend
do
story.
it.
Check it out. Bloomberg.com/weekend.
All right.
Last one. You got
Last
more for
one.
us?
If you're looking for some uncensored marmot content, I've got some good news for you.
I have not been, but as I linger
I know
on the
this
element
story.
of surprise.
I love this story so
That
much.
is a marmot right there for our
That's
radio
marmot.
listeners. Describe it. It looks like a woodchuck.
Large squirrel-like rodents with sharp claws and furry ears. That's the description in the New York Times. I thought that was so good. I
It's
had
the
to
badger of
just read
2026,
that.
the honey badger of 2026, maybe.
Well,
No,
there's an account on OnlyFans that uploads research
On
videos
OnlyFans.
of wild marmots. It's called Only Marms.
Only Marms.
It's PG rated, right? And it's
G-rated.
It's G-rated. They lost their
G-rated.
funding and they needed to, right? It has something to do with the.
That's right. There's a federally funded angle here. So Dr. Daniel Blumstein, a biologist, he's looking to cover a lack of research
Oh, look
funding
at them. They're
for his
tussling.
work in federal cuts
They are.
to
Sorry, I
scientific
don't-
research.
Okay.
And his idea, he was actually inspired by that TV show Margot's Got Money. So he's like, if we just use OnlyFans to raise money for this.
Not a G-rated treatment of the
Not a G.
OnlyFans
Correct.
economy.
Correct.
This is, though, and we keep it G-rated here. And he has uploaded this account. There was a little issue when he created the account because the image on his state-issued ID did not match the image of the marmots.
Well,
so the computers rejected him. He was able to get past that, and now has the Only Marms account. It's only raised a little bit of money.
I was going to ask if it's doing well.
At this point, $650 in tips. This was as of last week.
Oh.
You know, before the New York Times wrote this story, so I imagine it's done better. 2,900 visits, 112 subscribers.
All right, come on,
So-
OnlyFans
Oh,
fans.
hopefully.
like it'll even out your karma. Give to the marmots.
Marmot fans.
Tim, thank you very much. What do you call this segment?
This segment is called
BTW.
The Newspapers with
BTW.
Lisa
It's called
Mateo.
BTW. BTW.
Thank you for
That's all
joining
we
us
care
on
about is the
BT
last
Dubs
character.
today.
You're welcome.
Tim, that was much appreciated. Excellent work.
We're coming up on 8. Oh, I get to. I'm going to say it.
Go.
No, you can say it. Coming up on 8 a.m. in New York.
Stick with us. We'll be right back.
Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, are big changes in store at the Federal Reserve. just days after policymakers voted to hold interest rates steady. Reports Fed Chair Kevin Warsh may want to scale back the number of Fed meetings.
New this morning, states leading the charge. A bipartisan group of governors sitting down with Bloomberg this weekend for an exclusive announcement on immigration.
We all care, Republicans and Democrats, about a secure border. We all care about safety and security of our states and our nation, and we all care about the economy.
And a FIFA flip. President Gianni Infantino ditches a plan to open the World Cup to outside investment after a revolt by some of soccer's biggest clubs.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is 8 a.m. in New York from Bloomberg's world headquarters here in Manhattan. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Gura alongside Tim Stenovec. Lisa Mateo taking a much-deserved vacation on this Saturday morning. We're bringing you the latest breaking news, reporting, and analysis live this Saturday and every Saturday and Sunday from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock Wall Street time. A lot of news this morning. We talked about the Middle East, talked about India. We're going to talk about Ukraine here coming up as well. And then FIFA, huge story we're going to get into as well.
Randall's coming in. He's going to talk to us about that. But we're also going to talk about immigration. You know, this is a long simmering issue, and it's failed time and time again to make some grounds on the Hill. So a group of governors are taking it into their own hands. But first, taking it into his hands, we're going to go to Tim Stenovec with the headlines.
Hey, good morning, guys. President Trump has reportedly ordered a new attack on Iran as soon as this weekend. That's according to a report in the Wall Street Journal. At a cabinet meeting at Camp David yesterday, the president dismissed the idea this will be a prolonged war.
We're in there for 5 months, and if you look at Vietnam, they were in there for 20 years. You look at Afghanistan, they were in there for many years. You look at any one of the wars, Korea, any one of them, they're in there for many years. We're in for 5 months, and we have obliterated their military capacity.
This morning, Kuwait says its air defenses detected and destroyed Iranian drones in its airspace. And Hamas has confirmed it will disarm as part of a deal President Trump announced this week. It also calls on Israel to end its strikes and withdraw from Gaza. Israel has yet to comment, but the president says he expects the deal will be implemented.
It's a great breakthrough. Nobody thought that would be possible to disarm Hamas. That shows you how much success we're having with Iran.
And Hamas also says it will give up heavy weapons on the condition of the creation of a Palestinian state. Overnight in Russia launched an intense barrage of drones and ballistic missiles in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Authorities say at least 9 people were killed and 30 others injured. The strikes come as Moscow apparently looks to exploit Kyiv's shortage of Western-supplied anti-missile defenses. And the death toll has climbed to 67 in Spain's border crisis in its North African territory of Ceuta. It's about 60,000 migrants have crossed in there from the neighboring Morocco over about 24 hours. Spain plans to install a containment barrier along a breakwater fence that the migrants breached. And in France, firefighters are working to put out the last hot spots of a wildfire that's burned an area 4 times the size of Paris in Bordeaux. Meanwhile, strong winds are fanning dozens of blazes across Greece. The flames have forced thousands to evacuate in coastal areas of northwest of Athens. David and Christina.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks very much. All right, a new effort this morning from state leaders aimed at addressing one of the most politically divisive issues, one that has been for years. That's immigration. First on Bloomberg This Weekend, a bipartisan group of state leaders is launching a task force to try to find some solutions.
We spoke with the 4 governors leading the effort. It's Oklahoma's Kevin Stitt, Maryland's Wes Moore, Utah's Spencer Cox, and Delaware's Matt Meyer. They joined us from the stockyards in Oklahoma City. That is the site of the summer meeting of the National Governors Association. Governors, welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. Thank you so much for doing this. I just want to start out by saying, why immigration? Why did you want to launch this task force? And did you all know each other before, or is this kind of a first foray into projects? It's a group project, but it's one that matters to a lot of people. So tell me how this got started.
Well, this is a really big deal, and it really started with our chair and vice chair of the National Governors Association, Governor Stitt from Oklahoma and Governor Moore from Maryland, who saw this opportunity for us to get together in a bipartisan way. We were all together, and yes, we were all friends before this, but we were together in February and having a conversation about immigration, and we were all shocked at the level of bipartisanship, cooperation and agreement. We were really stunned that everybody had kind of the same opinions on what needed to be done. Obviously, there were some differences, and so with their leadership, they asked Governor Meyer and myself to chair the task force, And we're reaching out. We're working. I think there's a couple things why this matters, this timing. For 40 years, we've been trying to do immigration reform, and nobody's ever been able to get it done. Congress has not been able to move. But what's different this time is that we have a secure border, and President Trump was able to do that. We always heard that that was the starting point and that it could never be done, but it got done. And we all care, Republicans and Democrats, about a secure border. We all care about the safety and security of our states and our nation, and we all care about the economy in our country. And with those things in mind, we think now's the time to actually do some immigration reform.
Governor Moore?
I think that's exactly right. I think this does become a unique moment because as governors, governors are not focused on the partisan bickering and the back and forth. Governors are just focused on getting things done. We want to get things done for our communities. We want to get things done for our neighborhoods. And we see how this has become a very real issue that unfortunately governors do not control this issue. There's not an immigration policy for Utah and for Oklahoma and for Delaware and for Maryland. We have one national immigration policy. And what we know is that that immigration policy is broken. And it's been broken for a very long period of time. And so we're all focused on making sure that we can have safety in our communities and our neighborhoods, that we want to be able to ensure that the bad guys are removed, that we want to make sure that our communities are safe. And we also want to make sure that our economies can grow. And so whether it is an economy that is focused on cattle, or an economy that's focused on dairy, or an economy that's focused on chickens and our crab pickers, like in the case of Maryland, we need for Congress to be able to move on this. But we also know as governors, we don't just like sitting there and having to deal with the consequences of bad policy. We actually want to be part of the solution. And that's why I think this time and this moment is so important.
Well, so Governor Stitt, let me ask you, because when I heard about this working group, my first thought was, but this is a national issue. Exactly what Governor Moore was just saying. This is not something states can usually solve on their own because everybody needs a cohesive policy or it doesn't work. So when you're looking at this task force, what is the goal here? Is the goal to find things that individually states can do without Congress? Or is the goal for the states to get together and tell Congress, this is what the states need, this is what we're asking for, make it happen?
Yeah, I think it's kind of both of those things. So the states are, we're closer to our economies, like Governor Moore said. And so, we're sitting here at the Oklahoma City stockyards right now. And the reason I set this task force up is because I realized by talking to my colleagues that they're having the same issues. They're having the calls from their workforce community, whether it's agriculture, whether it's construction or hospitality. And they're saying, we're overthinking this issue. Let's actually have the governors issue workforce permits. And to Governor Cox's point, we all want safe communities. So the secure border is a non-starter. We have to have that done. There's broad agreement there. But now what? What's the end game? And I think we all want our economies booming. We want to make sure that we have the right jobs and we can match employers with employees. And to me, that's making sure that the state governors have a seat at the table. So the idea is to put together this task force to see what agreements we can come together as governors and then present that to Congress. It's a federal issue right now, but I believe that we all believe in federalism. And what happens in Maryland is maybe different than Oklahoma, and that's okay. There's not a one-size-fits-all. And so when the federal government tries to dictate a one-size-fits-all throughout the United States, I think that's a problem. Most Americans agree with us that we need to let the Delaware governor help the economy, and he's more focused on the economy there than the governor of Oklahoma or somebody in Washington, D.C.
Let's talk to the Delaware governor. Governor Meyer, I mean, when you look at bipartisan efforts in the past to work on immigration, they've failed pretty spectacularly. I mean, we even have partisanship here when it comes to hats. How do you guys think that you're going to be able to get together and effectively do this when half the guys didn't know we were wearing hats? Oh, look at this. Okay, all right. Well,
there
see
this. Look at that.
But I mean, seriously, do you really think that?
That's right.
All right.
And
well, that lovely gesture aside. Sorry, go ahead.
Didn't want Governor Moore's hairstyle.
It's true. I don't want to cover all this beauty over here.
Yeah. But, jokes aside, just as there are serious disagreements across our country within our states, there are serious disagreements among bipartisan groups of governors. There are serious disagreements about immigration policy, the current state, and where it needs to go among the four of us. I'm the grandson of immigrants. I believe this country should be a place of dignity and understanding more than pain and cruelty. We're in a small state. When someone comes in and arrests somebody in Target who's just minding their own business, that is a deep impact, not just on us economically, but on our community. You'll find broad disagreement. What Governor Moore and Governor Stitt have done that I think is so wonderful in convening this group is that, okay, we have our disagreements, but there are places that we agree where we can find common ground that's not being found right now in Washington. And we can come together, find solutions that we think ultimately involve governors in the lead and state governments in the lead in identifying the economic and workforce imperatives and saying, let's put that together as Democrats, Republicans, but more than anything as Americans, and let's move together.
I'm wondering if you think the way ICE and DHS have been going about this process has been effective. By a show of hands, I'm wondering, because I know there is some division about this, but I'm wondering if you think current immigration policy as it's being forced at DHS and ICE is effective. If you could raise your hand. That's, for our radio listeners, that's 0 hands. Governor Cox, I know last year your office announced it would be supporting the Trump administration's policy to go after illegal immigrants who threaten public safety and pledged to work with DHS. But it seems like you've also had some reservations about how that's being done and who they're targeting. Where do you think that process needs to improve, and what are some of your concerns there?
Sure. Well, I think, look, as we've had these conversations play out on a national level, and the polling will show this as well, that there's a lot of concerns about the way things were happening. I think especially coming out of Minnesota, some of the violence and the deaths that we've seen were deeply problematic. And I think, you know, the administration made some changes because of that. And I think that's really important. And that's why we're putting this group together, is to see, and again, the end result, I guess people can judge when we're done having these conversations and see if we can produce something to submit to Congress. But is there room for that type of a conversation in this hyper-partisan era, right? Is it even possible for people of good faith to sit down and come up with real solutions? We think that it is possible. We're excited to try to prove that. But there seems to be very broad agreement across the country, securing the border, getting the criminal element out of the country, and fixing legal immigration, and those are the 3 things we're really focused on. We're not going to agree on everything. There's still going to be big differences, broad differences, I'm sure, about citizenship and those types of things. But what work permits, can we start there?
But if I can add also, Governor Cox, we need to do something. We're doing this not necessarily just out of the goodness of our hearts. We're here because it's our job. Because with what we're seeing in workforce, what we're seeing in public safety, we feel like there is an imperative where we must, as a nation, as Americans, find a way to come together, Democrats, Republicans, with very different constituencies, and come up with policies to suggest to Washington to really move the country forward and beyond where we've been for the past few years.
Governor Stitt, you've said the president needs to tell us what's the end game. Is it truly to deport every single person here in the country? I don't think that's what America wants. Do you think ICE's current policies are hurting your abilities as governors, or even the ability of lawmakers to have a bipartisan conversation about this, because people get very, very upset about the way those tactics are carried out?
You know, listen, I do. I think we're not using common sense right now. And so really the common sense you're hearing from the 4 governors from 2 Republican states, 2 Democrat states. I'll give you a perfect example. We had a person from Vietnam that's been in Oklahoma City for 25 years, legally in the United States with a green card, working at Hobby Lobby, a major company here in Oklahoma City. And 25 years ago, they got caught smoking marijuana. At that time, they self-deported, then came back legally. They're married to an American. They have children. They're contributing to the economy. They've been a great citizen, chasing the American dream, but they've been picked up for deportation now because something that happened 25 years ago, even though they're here legally and they've checked in every single year. So that's a perfect example that we're not using common sense. And I can give you other examples like that. Hey, if you're breaking the law and you're a danger to society, I think we all agree they need to be out of here. But if you have an employer that's vouching for someone and they're chasing the American dream, they're contributing to the Oklahoma economy, Oklahoma agricultural economy, that's who we want. And I even throw something else out there. I mean, obviously we want to hire U.S. citizens first, but if you're having problems getting that workforce, then maybe let's charge those employers $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 that can go towards our national debt if they wanted to get a workforce permit. So there's a lot of solutions. We're overthinking this. The governors are here presenting solutions to Congress and to the American people.
There's actually a 2024 Pool Research found 75% of registered voters, Democrats and Republicans, say undocumented immigrants mostly fill jobs that American citizens do not want. Governor Moore, I want to ask you if you think ambiguity is the enemy here. And this is a criticism that we've heard not just of this administration, of the Biden administration, and I heard it when I covered President Obama as well. The immigration process in this country is so complicated that even if you intend to go through the channels correctly, go through the right door and wait in line, it is then not beneficial to you when you see things like amnesty, when you see people crossing the border illegally that are getting in front of you in line, and it's not clear for people trying to come to this country how they should do it or how best they should do it. Is that a big problem, and is that something you guys are hoping to address?
Well, I think that doing nothing is the enemy, because doing nothing is allowing the states to have to deal with a broken immigration system where we are then forced to deal with the consequences of the fact that Washington continues to punt on this issue. So we all agree we have to have comprehensive immigration reform, and it needs to have comprehensive immigration reform that is specific, that does actually say things that we all agree with, that yes, we want to make sure that violent offenders and the worst of the worst, that we can work together to remove them from society. You're not going to find a Democrat or Republican governor that would disagree with that. You're not going to find a Democratic or Republican governor that disagrees with the idea that we are hearing from our business communities. And I can tell you that for both myself and Matt, agriculture is the largest economies in our state. And also what we see in Utah and Oklahoma, they are, either one or two. So each and every one of us are dealing with with industries that are some of the largest economic drivers in our state. And we're also now seeing that because of this ambiguity, because of these broken policies, that you are having workers and you're having employers that are telling us, I have workers who are now not showing up. I have workers who are afraid to go to work. I have product that now is not going to get done and is not going to help benefit the economy because we continue to have this broken system. And so I think we know that there are certain baselines that we can agree that comprehensive immigration reform has got to make sure that we have a secure border, has got to make sure that we have safe streets. I do believe that if you have a person who's been here for, as Kevin was mentioning, not just years, but in some cases decades, has built their family here, that we need to have a pathway for them to be able to continue to work safely. But we have to also understand that this broken system is fundamentally crushing America's economy, and we can and we should be able to do better than that.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg this week, and I'm Tim Stenovec. Let's update you on today's top stories. President Trump is putting more pressure on the Senate to approve Attorney General nominee Todd Blanche. In a social media post this morning, the president says he will keep Blanche as acting AG and push for a $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund unless Republicans John Cornyn and Thom Tillis drop their opposition. At Camp David yesterday, the president said officials had agreed not to create the fund, but he made clear he disagreed with the decision. In Arizona, authorities have released an early ransom note in the disappearance of Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie's mother. A second note was also released yesterday, saying Nancy Guthrie died shortly after she was kidnapped and is, quote, buried in nature. Today marks 6 months since the 84-year-old was last seen at her home outside Tucson. Authorities hope someone will recognize the writing style in the notes. The Justice Department is dropping its criminal case against David Hearn, the former Olympic canoeist charged with deliberately damaging the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool. Government lawyers say new information shows the damage to the pool's lining was caused by flawed installation by the contractor. Hearn's lawyers say the case never should have been brought. David and Christina.
Tim, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is one of several world leaders who made the pilgrimage to Washington, D.C. this week to attend the memorial service for the late Senator Lindsey Graham. And while he was in D.C., Netanyahu had a meeting with the president. It was productive, according to the White House, and excellent, according to the Prime Minister.
All right, that being said, Israel's elections are less than 2 months away, and Netanyahu is facing a formidable challenger from his former military advisor, Gadi Eisenkot. We caught out with David Remnick, the editor of The New Yorker, who just published a new profile of Bibi's challenger.
David, thanks for being here. And I want to start with some recent polling here from Channel 12 in Israel. A question to voters was, who's the best candidate for Israel's prime minister? 59% said not Netanyahu. And it makes me wonder sort of how vulnerable is the prime minister right now as he looks forward to this election?
I want to mark it down right here. He is vulnerable, but I would never count Bibi Netanyahu out. You have to remember this country has moved steadily to the right in the last generation. Younger voters are even more conservative than their elders, and since October 7th, the country has moved to the right. So even though there's a lot of anti-Bibi sentiment for reasons we can discuss, and even though Gadi Eisenkot, the subject of the piece that in the New Yorker, is now seemingly in the lead, it's 3 months left in the race and a lot could happen.
But can you explain how that doesn't translate to the polls when people go to vote?
Well, I don't know. It's like long marriages. I think the country has grown sick of reports of his corruption. There are a lot of people who blame him for the national security collapse on October 7th. There are a lot of people who are angry about the deals he cuts with the ultra-Orthodox so that they don't have to go to the army or not get arrested for dodging the draft. There's a multiplicity of reasons, pick your poison. Most of the reasons are not the reasons that people here dislike him, I should add. And I should also say it's very important to note, I think tragically, that the business of two states and Palestinian rights is not exactly in the center of the campaign.
Let's talk about Gadi Eisenkot, whom you profile in the piece. He's somebody who knows Netanyahu very well. He was in the IDF for decades, in the Knesset after that. You describe him as the anti-Bibi. Tell us a bit about his platform and how it contrasts with what we see from the prime minister.
Again, I don't want to mistake Eisenkot for a man of the left, for example. This is somebody who was the chief of the general staff under Netanyahu. That's the top military position. It's like being the head of the Joint Chiefs. But I think that there's a very personal attachment to Eisenkot that Israelis no longer have in the main with Netanyahu. He's seen as more honest, more sincere, and I think that they reflect. They see something in him that they see in themselves, a certain brokenness and a certain damage, exemplified by the fact that Eisenkot lost his own son and two nephews soon thereafter in the war. So there's a certain kind of heart that he projects that Netanyahu certainly does not. A lot of Israelis really resented Netanyahu for his seeming indifference to the hostages and the hostage families during the war, and that caused a lot of anger. His antipathy, not his antipathy, but his seeming indifference to them.
That surprised me. I remember I was talking to a couple hostage families who were very conservative and very on the right side politically and were just absolutely furious at Netanyahu and saying this would be his downfall. But to your earlier point, so far it hasn't been. Do you think Eisenkot, because he's not exactly dichotomous, is he a good choice because he's not completely on the other side of things? But as you said, you would never count Bibi out completely.
Israel, let me be clear about this. Israel is in no way going to elect someone from the left as we understand it here. Israel, much as you might want them to, is not going to elect someone in this election cycle or anytime soon who makes it a priority to talk about the rights of the Palestinians, the future of a potential Palestinian state. That is just not the agenda. Even Yair Golan, who's the head of the Democratic Party, when he talks about two states, he talks about it in the, distant future, whatever that may be. Now, there are also, I should say, because it's rarely mentioned in Israel, a fifth of this country, 20% of the country, are Palestinian citizens of Israel, Arabs. They also get a vote. But in this coalition arrangement and the current political mood of Israel, it is an unsayable thing to say that you'll make a coalition with those voters, which complicates matters even more. Netanyahu is going to and is already attacking Eisenkot for being too friendly to Arabs or willing to make a government with the Arab parties. This campaign is going to get lower and lower and dirtier and dirtier. Netanyahu speaks the Trumpian language of the deep state, and he refers to us, meaning the press, as enemies of the people. There's a real interplay between Trump and Netanyahu, a real influence back and forth between the two of them, even though their relationship lately has suffered.
I want to talk about that in just a minute, but first I wonder if you could draw that contrast. We talked about the kind of ideological or political contrast between these two, so much as there is one. How about in terms of political polish? And you're kind of getting at that a moment ago. So when you were on the campaign trail with him, listening to him speak, how different does he present from a Benjamin Netanyahu?
It's night and day. Eisenkot is anything but a polished campaigner. He is not an exciting orator. He comes across, and you'll forgive the Yiddishism, as a kind of menschy guy. But this is also an army general and the author of the Dahiya Doctrine, which is a rather brutal military doctrine of destroying civilian infrastructure as a way to flush out terrorists who hide within it, whether it's in Lebanon or later in Gaza. But his personal bearing on the stump, his imagery in the Israeli imagination is quite different than Netanyahu's. You're absolutely right.
When it comes to the Trump-Bibi relationship that David was referencing, it's certainly gone through its ups and downs.
Yes.
But previously, when campaigning, there were posters of the two of them put up across Israel, and he was really leaning into this relationship. I'm wondering, coming off of Iran, if that's something he should be doing. Was Iran seen as a liability for Bibi strategically? And where does that leave this relationship going into the election?
You make a crucial point. And here's the crux of the difference. It's not personality. The crux of the difference is that for Netanyahu, it's in his greatest political interest for the war to keep going. For Trump, he can't get out of this war soon enough, even though he seemingly does not know how to, because he's in up to his neck. Trump, politically, who's facing the midterms, is seeing gas prices soar. He's seeing 2/3 of the American people, or 70% of the American people, against this war, seeing it as a strategic disaster, and they don't know why the hell we're in it in the first place. Whereas the Israelis have been sold a bill of goods, believe it or not, since Netanyahu came on the political scene decades ago. Yeah. Netanyahu has been trying to sell American presidents on going to war with Iran since the 90s. And since George W. Bush, Obama, any number of presidents. And Trump was the first to say yes. But now Trump finds himself looking to get out as quickly as possible and deeply resentful of Netanyahu. He loved Netanyahu when he was a winner, and not so much when things have gone south.
Dave, before you got this job, you were at the Post, you covered Russia, and I think we want to spend a couple of minutes talking about that. I mean, there's been a lot of conversation among experts about the position that Vladimir Putin is in right now, and we see the gains that Ukraine has made here in recent months, really pushing into Russian territory, and there's this sense that if Putin doesn't have his back to the wall, maybe it's getting closer to that. How do you think about his grip on power and the potential consequences of that, him being forced in a position where there is more vulnerability than we've seen in the last couple of years?
Let me say what most reporters are unwilling to say when faced with a television camera. I don't know. In other words, there's as opposed to the Israeli political culture, and to some extent the American political culture, which is relatively transparent and reportable, the ability to report inside the Kremlin and understand what might happen tomorrow in terms of opposition and so on and so forth is relatively obscure. It's a little bit like the old days of in communist times, pre-Gorbachev. However, I will say that a combination of strategic foolishness, the change in military technology, and the sheer will of the Ukrainian people has seen, after all this time, you're absolutely right, a reversal of fortune. And it is deeply embarrassing to Vladimir Putin that the Ukrainians are able to send drones into Russian territory and take out things like, manufacturing depots or energy sites or what have you. This is deeply embarrassing. This is, the asymmetrical kind of war that we've been hearing all about. The losses on the Russian side are enormous. Enormous. No American president would be able to withstand that politically. But because Putin is a dictator and there's no feedback loop politically, he remains in power. But if you're asking me, can he be overthrown tomorrow? The answer, quite honestly, is I have no idea, and neither do you. And if somebody is telling you different in the press because they have, an inside source or something, they're guessing. They're guessing.
Fair enough. But quickly before I let you go, I mean, if this is not sustainable for him and he's left with two choices, that's capitulate/negotiate, come to the table, figure something out, or with his back up against the wall, as David was saying, do something extreme. Which of those directions do you think he goes?
Well, I don't think he wants to be in this situation, but the humiliation of withdrawal to him would be extraordinary. He staked his entire political biography and being on this idiotic and brutal war.
Yeah.
Absolutely staked it upon it. And it would not surprise me that what might bring an end to it is mortality. Mortality.
Great to hear from David Remnick, a real polymath and a great profile of Gabi Eisenkot. We're going to talk with Bill Taylor, the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, here in just a little while. And I think, as I mentioned at the top of the show, what transpired in Kyiv overnight, this attack, really massive. We've been talking in recent weeks about the way this war has been heading, how much of an incursion Ukraine has made into Russia, really, with its drone attacks on major cities. A fearsome attack by Russia last night.
And that coming almost immediately after it looked like President Trump was backing off that pledge to give Ukraine the interceptors it's asked for so long. All right, coming up next, though, the fallout from FIFA president's plan to open the World Cup to outside investment. Could his job be on the line? Randall Williams joins us next here on the set of Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Tim Stenovec. Let's update you on some of today's top stories. The Big Ten and Southeastern conferences agreed last night to support a Senate bill that looks to regulate college sports. This after receiving concessions over language regarding third-party name, image, likeness deals. The bill still has a long road ahead. It needs to get to 60 votes to halt debate and head to an up or down vote before the Senate heads for summer break next Friday. Elon Musk is now poorer than he was before the SpaceX initial public offering. The world's first trillionaire saw his wealth peak at $1.3 trillion on June 16th. It now stands at $684 billion on the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. That $600+ billion decline, though, is more than any other billionaire has ever been worth, other than Elon Musk himself. And former Republican Congressman George Santos has agreed to pay more than $35,000 to settle allegations that he manipulated a wager on the prediction market Kalshi about whether he'd attend the State of the Union address earlier this year. Santos has been subject to an event contract where users could wager yes or no on whether he would actually go to the event. Santos himself placed wagers on both sides of the trade. He also agreed to a 3-year trading ban. Christina and David.
But Tim, he knew if he was going. Yes. If you're going to do the thing.
Therein lies the rub.
I guess that's the point. I guess that's why he knew that he would know the outcome, right?
All right, well.
Yeah.
All right, leaving your options open.
It's like when options open. That's
I'll
a good
let
joke.
you know if I want to come to the event.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Got it.
FIFA President Gianni Infantino has abandoned a controversial plan to create a commercial entity that would have opened the door to outside investors for the World Cup after facing intense opposition from key regional football bodies and top clubs.
In a statement posted by FIFA to X, Infantino said, quote, "Having listened carefully to all the views, it's become clear that the project has created divisions of a nature that, regardless of the level of support, are no longer in the interest of the objectives set out in the first place." Joining us now is Bloomberg senior sports reporter Randall Williams. Randall, great to see you. And let me just start with kind of how far Gianni Infantino has fallen here. He was all over the country, all over the hemisphere during the World Cup.
Can we just do a story on he had like more jet miles than almost anybody else?
Cruising around in that Gulf Stream, up for re-election in March, enjoying quite a bit of support. Let's just start with the genesis of this idea. Where did it come from on the heels of a $15 billion World Cup? Why did he feel like this was the moment to kind of push forward this plan that's fallen apart?
Well, Bloomberg previously reported that this was in progress way before the World Cup started. And so I imagine that Gianni Infantino knew that this World Cup was going to be the most successful yet, in large part because the U.S., Canada, and Mexico have stadiums set up unlike any other country in the world. And so he's looking at it and saying, okay, we're going to make more money than we've ever made. But why don't we make even more money than that? I have this private deal set up. It's good for everybody. And then UEFA and CONCACAF sort of stomped on that. And now he is in big trouble.
Yeah, we have a statement this morning from UEFA. It says it welcomes FIFA's withdrawal of plans to sell stake in the World Cup, but it goes on and says we cannot keep going on like this with secret schemes on fast-track timescales cooked up by faceless individuals and a dubious benefit to the game. We must identify those responsible and hold them to account. The current FIFA leadership has not only lost UEFA's confidence, but also that of many other members of the football family. I mean, we were talking.
How do you really feel, UEFA? I feel
right. I mean, that's
not a lot of subtlety there, Randall. But is this real? I mean, he had kind of shored up his position so that he couldn't be kicked out, but it seems like that may be a reality.
Yeah, it's a big question going forward. And you mentioned his reelection in March. I imagine that this puts a lot of question marks around it because they go on to say the shabby backroom opaque deal he hatched and tried to force through was anything but transparent. And with reserves standing at over $5 billion, he has failed to use associations' money for the benefit of the game. And so they're basically saying, we don't trust you anymore. You have $5 billion in your bank account. Why do we need $20 billion more? And why did the world need this $4.2 billion deal with Joshua Kushner's Thrive Capital? I think he's going to have to do some campaigning to keep his job come March.
Last I checked, FIFA, a nonprofit entity. How should we think about this in the context of that? You mentioned Joshua Kushner, Thrive Capital, the fund that he was creating here, the work that he's done with past athletic teams. This is a departure from the way that FIFA has operated for a long time. Should we no longer regard it as a nonprofit entity? How did Gianni Infantino kind of make the case that what he's doing here wasn't jeopardizing that categorization?
Well, it has to be a nonprofit now that his deal failed.
There you go.
I think if you look at a comparison of this, people are talking about this in comparison to the PGA Tour versus the PGA Tour Enterprises, which is the tour's for-profit arm. But that came about because Live Golf was actively threatening the PGA Tour. There was a legitimate rivalry between those two organizations for a couple of years, and the PGA Tour Enterprises helped settle that. It helped right some wrongs and helped steer golf in the right direction. And so that was the PGA Tour's version, and it's been welcomed by everybody involved in the golf world. This was not. This was as if, the PGA Tour did it, and then the players said, no, this is not right. And so from FIFA's perspective, it's like, you can't have a for-profit arm because France, England, Portugal, Germany, and so many other superpower nations are saying, we don't trust your money and we don't trust your head figure.
How did he get here? Is this a bit of a self-own? Because you look at where he was in his position, and then there was the controversy with the red card, his closeness to President Trump, and it just seems like he thought he had political capital that he didn't really have, especially coming off of some of those other controversies.
Well, it's really interesting. President Trump said yesterday that Gianni Infantino and he did not discuss this deal. I wonder what would have happened if they did. But if you go back farther than, the Flo Balogun controversy, Gianni Infantino, I would say, has been pandering to President Trump for over a year now. President Trump received a Peace Prize in December. I want to say less than 30 days later, maybe a little over 30 days later, we went and seized Venezuela's president. 60 days after that, we went to war in Iran. And so FIFA's pandering to President Trump has long made UEFA and other members of FIFA very, very uncomfortable. You think about outside of politics, we also had hydration breaks. Those things are not normal in soccer. UEFA was not a fan of that either. And ultimately, those things were to maximize revenue. The claim was that it was going to be very, very hot during the summer. But really, it wasn't. In different climates like Miami, of course, they might have needed them. But here in New York, it was not sweltering.
Needed those sprinklers on every quarter of the half. All right, let me ask you just sort of about where things go from here. And I think we've seen the power of these other groups, UEFA, the Asian Federation. What does that tell you just about the power that FIFA holds generally? I think there are a lot of folks kind of coming to this story cold, unaware of the power that FIFA has had historically. But what does it tell us that these kind of regional federations have wielded and continue to wield a lot of power and influence here going forward?
Well, FIFA's main event is the World Cup. They have been trying to build other events, both the men's and women's World Cup, and they added the Club World Cup, which sees, clubs like Real Madrid and FC Barcelona, as well as Inter Miami, compete. But outside of that, that's what FIFA is known for. The UEFA is known for the Euro League, the Champions League, the Euro Cup, and then you go all around the world, and different federations have different tournaments that players think of similarly to the World Cup. Now, of course, the World Cup is the big prize that everybody wants to win. But if that's your only thing, then everybody is sort of looking at you and saying, why don't you just stick to the formula of what you had? The World Cup has worked every 4 years for both men's and women's. It's more popular than it's ever been. It's made more money than it's ever been. So why does this $20 million deal need to happen? And I think that, in terms of the power that these organizations have, we just saw witness. We saw UEFA and CONCACAF stomp on this and say, we're out. And next thing you know, within 48 hours or maybe 72 hours, this deal was dead.
All right, Randall Williams, thank you so much for joining us and breaking that down. You are, of course, our senior business of sports reporter and the host of Sports City and the co-host of the Business of Sports podcast.
Radical how quickly this has happened. I mean, just yesterday we were talking about it on Bloomberg Television as the story was still developing.
We had planned on having Randall come talk
just
tomorrow
to talk about
what
the
this deal
proposal and the
was.
longevity of it. I think the financial structure of it's so fascinating as well. But as Randall was saying there, it'll be fascinating to watch here in the coming days sort of what this means for the leadership of Gianni Infantino. Of course, going back to Sepp Blatter, the bar for leadership at FIFA was pretty low, and they were forgiving of a lot for a very long time. Curious sort of if he lasts till March to this election. We're going to find out here in the weeks ahead.
One of the ironies, of course, has been Sepp Blatter now criticizing Gianni Infantino, which is, you might want to be a little bit careful
Glass
there.
houses, et cetera.
Exactly. All right, moving on. Western Europe is still under the threat of dangerous wildfires. New evacuations issued at coastal towns in Greece. We're going to have a live report on the impact of tourism and livelihoods there in some of Europe's most popular destinations.
You can take us with you no matter where you go. You can watch us on Bloomberg Television. Listen to the show on Bloomberg Radio. You can stream it live on the Bloomberg Business app or watch it at Bloomberg.com. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Christina Ruffini with David Gura. Europe's wildfire threat is continuing to shift as the blazes are forcing evacuations from southeast English, the Greek island of Crete, while cooler weather is helping firefighters gain some ground in southwest France. Climate change, of course, is playing a huge role as it's increasing the risk of dangerous weather on the world's fastest warming continent.
With forecasts for more hot, dry conditions in the weeks ahead, they raise the prospect of the fire season stretching well into the fall. We're joined now by Bloomberg Athens Deputy Bureau Chief Paul Tugwell. Paul, thank you very much. Thanks for your coverage as well over these last few weeks. And let me just start by asking you for the state of play. I know that the winds had been terrible in Greece in recent days. That made it difficult for aircraft to get to some of these fires. Has that subsided, and what's the status of the many fires that have engulfed parts of Greece?
It hasn't subsided. In fact, it's got worse. We're having a very, very difficult day today. In fact, before I joined you, the climate crisis and civil protection minister put out a statement saying that the number of fires combined with the gale force winds and the dry conditions has brought the state's fire fighting mechanism to its limit. He pointed out that the problem is that because of strong winds, gale force indeed, planes are experiencing, and helicopters, turbulence, which makes it very difficult to fly. But also it makes it very dangerous for them to scoop down either into the sea or lakes to pick up water to try and help firefighters in their efforts to tackle the blazes. The worst fire today is in an area called Yorker, which is in central southern Greece. And that started yesterday and carried on burning through the night. And it's spreading east into the region of Attica, which is the home region of Athens itself, and has brought about impressive scenes of destruction, pristine pine forests, but also houses burnt, stores, creating a very difficult situation today, indeed.
Paul, as I'm talking to you, we're going to pull up a map that you can access in the terminal of kind of all the wildfire hotspots throughout the region. I apologize for what could be a stupid question, but David and I both grew up out west, and I know in the U.S. when you have fires, obviously each state has capacities and resources that they can shift. Canada often helps with these wildfires. In Europe, what are the resources like? Is it mostly left to individual countries because other countries are battling their own issues? Is there collaboration? Is there some sort of EU firefighting task force that they can send in to bolster these local community teams? How is this working? Is it working?
There is indeed at the European Union level a mechanism whereby countries that are in need of help, we saw this last week in Spain, because they have a particularly bad situation, can call on the European Union to ask other member states to provide aircraft, either helicopters or airplanes. Greece sent, as an example, 2 Canadair firefighting aircraft to Spain last week. Yes, each country has its own fleet. And if that fleet can cope with the situation in its own country, that suffices. But if not, then there is help throughout the bloc to help one another's countries.
Christina, drawing that parallel to wildfires here in the U.S., where the geography is decidedly different. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about that, the way that Greece is arrayed, what the geography is like, and how, indeed, that's complicating these efforts.
Indeed. Today, the biggest fire that I was mentioning is in an area that's mountainous, forested area. There are small villages and settlements here and there that are difficult to get to because roads are only single-lane highways. They're not very wide. That makes it difficult for ground forces to enter. But it's also more difficult for aircraft to help firefighters tackle these flames. Sometimes the fire will be in an area that's easy to access, but when it's not, as today, then that's why, combined with the high winds, we're seeing such a disastrous situation. It's harder to deal with.
Well, obviously, there's an enormous human toll and emotional toll, but as with these fires in the U.S., there's also a really big economic toll, and especially when it comes to insurance and going forward in some of these areas. We have some sound we want to play for you.
We've put a lot of measures in place in order to help the people with fast claims payments, with relocations, and simplification of the procedures. Obviously, the question will come, how much will this all cost? But this is far too early because, these have just happened. If you go back over the last 3-4 years, we have had many of these events, and all of these events, yes, have touched us, but have touched us in a way that we have always well managed and absorbed.
That was Thomas Bilber. He's the AXA CEO, but I know it's early to talk about. Are people concerned about the recovery efforts, how that's going to happen, insurance payouts, given how many of these fires have happened and how frequently? It feels like almost every summer now.
Well, in Greece, it's compulsory to have insurance against fires for properties. Wildfires aren't new to Greece. It's just the situation is that we're seeing more of them and for a longer period of the year because of climate change. But as it's compulsory in Greece, insurance companies are used to having to deal with claims for fire damage. I would imagine going forward, as we see more fires, you're going to have maybe higher premiums as part of your insurance policy to insure against fires. But based on historical data, once a fire has subsided, the state steps in and assesses the damage of properties. And according to the level of the damage, insurance companies have to react either quick or take longer to make payments to people who have seen their properties burnt.
All right, Paul Zugwell, he is our Athens Deputy Bureau Chief. Thank you so much for joining us. Please stay safe.
Again, great coverage from him and the team there, yes, in Greece, but across Europe as these fires continue. And you can find that at Bloomberg.com or on the Bloomberg terminal. We are coming up at 9 o'clock here in New York City.
The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend. We're coming to you live from New York City, Bloomberg's world headquarters here on a Saturday. David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We're here with Tim Stenovec. Lisa Mateo is taking a well-deserved vacation. She mentioned it's Saturday, August 1st. Got to pay that rent.
Yes,
got to remember when I
indeed
get
it
home.
is. How did we get here so quickly? I feel like
the summer
it was
has
just
flown
June.
by. I mean, it's been a very, very busy news week. News season. We've got a lot of headlines already today. We've talked about immigration. We've talked about the Fed. We've talked about tech stocks. And next, we're going to talk a deep dive into Ukraine with the former ambassador there, talking about what's going on and where that country goes in the future.
I want to tease. We're going to talk to the father of the 401k, the guy who designed it and made it a thing that so many of us take advantage of. That is coming up. He has a new invention he's going to talk to us about. Okay, hasn't caught fire yet, but we'll see if it does.
He could yell at me for my bad financial management and retirement planning.
All right. Before that, though, let's go check the headlines with Tim Stenovec. Tim?
Hey, good morning, guys. President Trump has reportedly ordered a new attack on Iran as soon as this weekend. That's according to a report in the Wall Street Journal. The president cast doubt on continuing negotiations with Tehran at a Camp David cabinet meeting yesterday.
They're being decimated. They have no Navy, they have no Air Force, they have no anti-aircraft. Doesn't mean they don't have any capability.
This morning, Kuwait says its air defenses detected and destroyed Iranian drones in its airspace. Hamas has confirmed it will disarm as part of a deal President Trump announced this week. The agreement also calls on Israel to end its strikes and withdraw from Gaza. Israel has yet to comment, but the president says he expects the deal will be implemented.
So we do have an understanding with Israel. Israel is very happy about it. Israel helped us. And they've been very good. They've been very good about it. Most people said that would be a deal that would be undoable. Now, will it go through its ups and downs? It's a very complex situation over there. The people are very complex.
Hamas also says it will give up its heavy weapons on condition of the creation of a Palestinian state. The death toll has climbed to 67 in Spain's border crisis in its North African territory of Ceuta. About 60,000 migrants crossed in from neighboring Morocco in the span of about 24 hours. Spain's government plans to install a containment barrier along a breakwater fence that the migrants breached. And in France, firefighters are working to put out the last hotspots of a wildfire that's burned an area 4 times the size of Paris in Bordeaux. Meanwhile, strong winds are fanning dozens of blazes across Greece that have forced evacuations, including in coastal areas of northwest Athens. And Russia launched an intense barrage of drones and ballistic missiles overnight in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. Authorities say at least 9 people were killed and 30 others injured. Meanwhile, Ukrainians struck oil facilities deep inside Russian territory this morning. Local authorities have confirmed a fire at an industrial site, but they aren't specifying what was damaged. David and Christina.
Tim, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Tim. As Tim just mentioned, a large-scale Russian missile attack killed at least 9 people in Kyiv just days after a Russian missile crashed in Poland this week, about 62 miles from the country's border with Ukraine. NATO Secretary Mark Rutte called the incident yet another reckless act by Russia and a dangerous consequence of its war against Ukraine.
According to Poland's prime minister, there is no reason to believe that Poland was the target, but Donald Tusk says he has been in touch with European leaders who, quote, all expressed their full solidarity and readiness to provide any assistance. Joining us now on this Saturday is Bill Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He's currently a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council. Ambassador, great to have you with us once again. And let's start with this attack and sort of how you see it in the broader sweep of what's been happening in this war over the last few months. I know that you were in Ukraine just a couple of months ago, and so much of what we've heard in recent weeks on this show is that Ukraine has gained the upper hand here, has had an advantage, has been pursuing more targets within Russia itself in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. What does this latest round of attacks that we saw overnight tell you about the trajectory of this war?
Well, David, this tells us that Putin is willing to fire at civilian targets, increase the number of these ballistic missiles that he fires into Ukraine, into the capital, but not just the capital. My sense is he's desperate to try to get the Ukrainians to quit, to surrender, to stop fighting, and they won't. As you say, I've been there many times over the past 4 years, and they are determined to last it out. They are determined to maintain their independence. So this is just the latest version of what Putin's trying to do.
Ambassador, I do want to ask you, it can't be a coincidence that this larger attack comes right after we heard from the president, him backing away from that pledge to give Ukraine interceptors. We have some sound from the cabinet meeting I'm going to let you listen to.
Now, we have not agreed to that. We're talking about it. but it's a hard thing to give away that kind of technology.
That's basically being asked if they have agreed, which it seemed like that agreement was going forward, to let Ukraine license Patriot missiles. We had Republican Mike McCall on the show who said it was incredibly important, and he was going to fight with the White House, not only the White House, but the defense contractors if they were in the way. Why do you think the president has changed his mind on this, and how consequential is that to the conflict at this point?
Well, the consequences for the conflict, Christina, at this point are frankly very small. That is, even if these licenses were granted, as President Trump said they were going to be in Ankara last month, even if they were granted today, it would be a long time, months, maybe a year before the Ukrainians could actually start pumping out these Patriot missiles. So the immediate effect is not great. What should happen, what needs to happen, is other nations, as well as the United States, we should provide the Ukrainians with the missiles that exist right now. They are being bombarded, as you've just reported, every night with these long-range ballistic missiles from Russia. And the only thing that can stop them right now are these Patriot missiles. And there are Patriot missiles that are available. Yes, the stocks have been drawn down by the war in Iran, but there are missiles in inventories that could be used. And the Ukrainians are not waiting. Ukrainians are not waiting for these licenses that may or may not come, as the president has said. He may be backing off of that. The Ukrainians are making their own, developing their own version of Patriots.
Just going to cite something else that's happened here over the last few hours. So we had those comments from President Trump, and then there was a post on X from President Zelenskyy about a conversation that he had with Vice President Vance by telephone, called it a good phone call. Quote, "We followed up on our recent meetings with President Trump in Washington, which was positive and productive, as Russia's air attacks on our country continue unabated. Air defense, specifically Patriot interceptors against ballistic missiles, remains a top priority." What is your sense of the quality of communication here between Ukraine's president and the Trump administration? We could go back to the NATO summit, which there was that meeting between President Zelenskyy and President Trump, and I think a good deal of happy talk and good feeling about how that went. Do you feel like the president at this point in time, from the comments that he made at that cabinet meeting and elsewhere, is seeing this conflict in a different light than he had before?
I think so, David. I think he is. And I think the reason is President Trump recognizes that, as you've just reported, Ukraine is actually on the front foot. They have the initiative. They are pushing back on the Russians, firing deep into Russia with these long-range missiles that they make themselves, the long-range cruise missiles that they make themselves, as well as killing more Russians on the front line in Ukraine than the Russians can recruit. So the Russians are having difficulty on the battlefield. They can't defend themselves against the Ukrainian missiles, but the Ukrainians are vulnerable to these ballistic missiles, and they need those interceptors. They need the Patriot interceptors now, even while they develop their own.
The attrition rate for Russian soldiers is really startling. We've got President Zelenskyy was talking about that on Fox News on Tuesday.
So now Putin is losing 30,000 his soldiers per month. This is big, too much losses, like President Trump says. It's many losses, but he doesn't want to stop this war. So now initiative not in the hands of Putin.
The claim from Ukraine there is that the Russians are losing 20,000 soldiers per month. If this war turns into a war of attrition, logic would think the larger country will last longer, but it's not really an even conflict like that. The other thing that comes to mind is, the USSR played this game in Afghanistan, and it precipitated the fall of the Soviet Union. Is there a risk here to the security of Putin, to the Russian government, if this continues at this rate?
Christina, you're absolutely right. There is that risk. And you're right to point out that the Soviet defeat in Afghanistan led to the fall of the Soviet Union. That has to worry Putin. That has to worry Putin as the pressure builds on him. And President Zelensky's right. The ratio of Russian soldiers to Ukrainian soldiers killed is 8-to-1. 8 Russians for 1 Ukrainian. That's not sustainable. Putin has to realize that he cannot win, that he's losing on the battlefield. His economy is in very bad shape, thanks to sanctions, but also thanks to the Ukrainian attacks. Putin is going to have to end this war soon, or as you just pointed out, he's in trouble like the Soviet Union was.
I want to pull back if we could. I want to ask you just about the U.S.'s attitude toward Europe more broadly now. And I saw a piece this morning by Paul McCleary of Politico writing about how the Pentagon is giving up leadership of a U.S.-led NATO command in Wiesbaden, Germany. This is the Security Assistance Group, rather. What does that tell you? The statement from the Pentagon that Paul McCleary got is that SAGU is always meant to be temporary. This effort is aimed at burden shifting within the alliance to support Ukraine and to align U.S. resources in accordance with the national defense strategy. Let's linger on that for a moment here. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about the U.S. changing tack, changing position at a moment when it does seem like there is a lot of European, certainly international interest in what's happening here in Ukraine and what it means for the continent more broadly.
David, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. The Europeans are stepping up. Europeans feel the threat of Russia more directly than our Pentagon, apparently. The Europeans are stepping up financially. They provided a $100 billion loan. It's going to keep the Ukrainians going for a good 2 years with weapons as well as their government. So the Europeans are also buying weapons from the United States manufacturers and providing them to the Ukrainians. The Europeans and the European members of NATO are really stepping up, and that is having an effect. That is having a real effect. It's too bad for us. That is, we're forfeiting, as you just indicated, we're forfeiting leadership. But the Europeans are stepping up, and the Ukrainians appreciate the Europeans' leadership.
I think the president and this administration would argue that it's well past time for Europe to step up, to contribute more to their own defense. And that's an argument that even President Obama agreed with in his time. He was constantly frustrated with NATO allies. But is there something the U.S. gives up? Does the U.S. lose control, lose influence, and lose the ability to wield that large body of allies by pulling back and allowing Europe to take more control of its own destiny?
Christina, both things are true. That is, the Europeans are stepping up. They are developing their own defenses. They are able to operate and increasingly able to operate on their own. And that's a good thing. That's even a good thing for NATO, for the Europeans to be able to do that. But you're exactly right. The United States, we need allies. We see this in every conflict. We need allies. We need allies to deter the Russians. We needed allies to deter the Soviet Union. We need allies in every conflict that we've been involved in. And our leadership, the U.S. leadership in NATO, was extremely valuable. We're not losing that totally because we do provide incredible amounts of capability to NATO, but the Europeans are stepping up, and Europeans stepping up is a good thing. It'll make NATO stronger.
Ed, you mentioned they have been providing more and more defense aid to Ukraine. Before we leave this topic, I did want to get your take on the politics within Ukraine and this cabinet shuffle that we've seen with Zelenskyy dismissing the defense minister, Fedorov. Very controversial decision, led to street protests, led to the dismissal in the end of essentially the equivalent of their, chief of the armed services. Was this a strategic blunder for Zelenskyy? Can he recover from this? And do you think he's making the right moves following this?
So it was a mistake by President Zelenskyy, but the mistake was not a cabinet shuffle. The new prime minister knows a lot about getting ready for the winter. He comes from the oil and gas industry. He knows how to prepare for the winter. The new prime minister, Goretsky, can bring a big benefit for Ukraine. On the military side, yes, Fedorov, the young defense minister, now out of the job. And again, that was probably a mistake on the part of Zelenskyy. However, he rectified it right away. I mean, as you just said, the Ukrainians came to the streets and protested that. They really protested the leadership of the top general.
Yeah.
And President Zelenskyy listened and replaced the top general with a new, younger general. So I think on net, Ukraine is probably better off after this cabinet reshuffle, even with the change in the defense ministry.
Bill Taylor, I want to get in a time machine here, go back to 2006. You were working with the quartet, you were working on Gaza and the effort to get Israel to disengage from that region, working with James Wolfenson on that, among others. What are you thinking as you read the latest posts from the president about the deal that he says his board of peace has brokered here, as you see the back and forth continuing here between Israel and the Palestinians about who would do what first and how this could come to pass? Do you read that news from the president as positive? Do you see it as indicating that there's any kind of deal in the offing here? What would it take?
So David, you go back in history. That's a great question. Yes, we did some good work. Jim Wolfenson, may he rest in peace, did some very, very good work on getting the Israelis and the Palestinians to agree on the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. And that was a success. It was very controversial, but they agreed, the Israelis agreed to withdraw from Gaza, and Jim Wolfenson and his team helped on that. That's what's necessary today, that kind of working with the Israelis and the Palestinians to come up with a formula, which it probably includes a state for Palestine, in order to get to a place where there's going to be peace in that region.
But Ambassador, given where Netanyahu is in the election cycle, given the viability of a Palestinian state at this time, I mean, people aren't even speaking like it's an option anymore. Is that a realistic goal at this point? And if not, what is the alternative?
Christina, that's the problem. That's the problem. There is no alternative that anyone has come up with. There needs to be two states, Israel and Palestine. There needs to be probably different leadership in both. And that's possible because the current leadership in both is not able to come up with this. But that's the end goal. That has to be the end point. There's not an alternative.
Ambassador Bill Taylor, thank you very much for the time. He was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, and as I pointed out there, has done a lot of work throughout the Middle East and Europe over the course of his long career in the Foreign Service. And grateful for your time here on this Saturday as we covered a couple of the roiling conflicts around the world, and hope to have you back soon. I know you travel to Ukraine frequently, and eager to get your perspective on the heels of your next trip there. Just fascinating to see the president coming out with this, Christina, this announcement, and then seeing how many of the details here are still scant, what needs to be filled in.
It's also starting this pattern of making peace deals about countries who are not party to the peace deal. There's a big factor in there that we haven't heard from the Israelis yet.
Yes.
It's also this errant Russian strike in Poland was very interesting as well, because of course Poland is a NATO country. So the big fear in this conflict was spillover, and so far as you saw, it's holding, but things are getting tense.
And I think that's why Prime Minister Tusk so emphatic there that he doesn't think that Poland was deliberately targeted by Russia.
Important distinction.
Yeah. All right. It would be Kevin Warsh's most significant move yet as chair of the Federal Reserve, cutting down on the number of Federal Open Market Committee meetings. What would the market reaction be after what was already a chaotic week on Wall Street? That is straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend on Bloomberg Radio, television, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Tim Stenovec. Let's update you on today's top stories. President Trump is putting more pressure on the Senate to approve Attorney General nominee Todd Blanche. In a social media post this morning, the president says he will keep Blanche as acting AG and push for a $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund, unless Republicans John Cornyn and Thom Tillis drop their opposition. Tillis is responding in a post on X. He says it's unfortunate Blanche won't be confirmed because of the president's reversal on the fund. He says he hopes this can be resolved Tuesday when the Senate takes up Blanche's nomination again. In Arizona, authorities have released early ransom notes from the disappearance of Today's Show host Savannah Guthrie's mother. Today marks 6 months since the 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie was last seen at her home outside of Tucson. Authorities hope someone will recognize the writing style in the notes. The Marine Corps says a pilot who ejected from an F-35B stealth fighter is expected to live. The jet crashed yesterday near Miramar Air Base in San Diego, which used to host the Navy training school depicted in Top Gun. A Marine statement called it a Class A mishap. That's the most severe category. It's for damage worth more than $2 million. David and Christina.
He's doing right. Yeah, that's what we should say.
Thanks, Tim.
All right, this week the Fed voted 9-3 to hold the line on interest rates, keeping them unchanged for the 5th straight meeting.
This was Kevin Warsh's second meeting as chairman, and while he echoed many of the themes from the first go-around, he received some criticism for the lack of specifics on how he plans to tackle inflation. All right, with us now, Kevin Gordon. He's head of macro research and strategy at Schwab. And you know what? Tim Stenovec, why don't you come over here and join the couches? I will be surrounded by men in blazers to talk about finance, as is the way, as is the way. All right, Kevin, my first question for you is, you referred to what we saw last week, especially in the bond market react, as a twist tantrum.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So I was thinking about Operation Twist, about 15-ish years ago, where you basically had the opposite reaction in the bond market, which was 30-year yields coming down, 2-year yields moving up. That was, a direct intervention, result of a direct intervention from the Fed. So of course, different than I think what Warsh was probably hoping what would happen in terms of the reaction in the bond market on Wednesday. But I think the reaction is very much consistent with what you've heard in terms of the sort of lack of details and clarity around the Fed's framework, or at least Warsh's framework for how they're thinking about setting policy, and more, I think, sort of a reaction to what he didn't say as opposed to what was said during the meeting. So it's become almost this, I think, tantrum in the market because, the more you go with the Fed and Warsh in particular, talking about getting to price stability, but not specifying, how to get there and what the cadence of rate hiking is going to look like to do that or to achieve that. That's where you get more of that rupture and that negative reaction.
Tim Stenovec, I'm going to read here from Anna Wong, our chief U.S. economist, who tweeted this. Kevin Warsh managed to say a lot without saying anything. If Greenspan's mantra is, if you think you can understand what I'm saying, you don't understand what I'm saying, Warsh's would be, if you think I'm saying anything at all, you don't understand what I'm saying. You, on Business Week Daily, watching all of this unfold, dealing with it in real time, what was your reaction just to the way in which the chairman engaged with, yes, the decision, the state of the economy, and indeed his plans for the Fed so much as he detailed them, and what the Fed's reaction mechanism is?
Well, it was about the communication strategy for me. And this is coming from, really just being used to what we heard from our previous Fed chair, Jay Powell, for the last 8 years. And I think a lot of people, including the market, David, are really trying to get to know what his strategy is and what his communications methods are. And I think we saw that play out in the instant reaction from the bond market on that day, and then the reaction that we also saw in the equity market. I think, too, we're going to have to wait and see what all the Fed speakers then go out and say, and that's sort of like a part of this whole process that I really look forward to, because it's not just the chair who we hear from. It's all the different members of the FOMC and also the voting members, and the way that they communicate what they see as their mission at the Fed and how they achieve stable prices and maximum employment.
And Kevin, Warsh has been very clear about how he feels about forward guidance. But not providing forward guidance is different than not providing details on how he's planning to tackle inflation or shape monetary policy. Is that what you're seeing in the markets?
Yes, and I think also, and I'm glad you point out the distinction, because you do get some members of the FOMC that are a lot more pointed in how they think about, setting policy. So of the dissenters that we had at the meeting, the 3 dissenters, they have been a little bit more pointed in saying, hey, we should probably go in increments now, and then that sort of helps us avoid having to do a larger hike in the future. That's a little more leaning towards forward guidance, but just I think the simple sort of framework around, and somebody had asked the question in the press conference of how do you respond to a supply shock dominated environment? How do you think about policy in that environment? And not having an understanding, us not knowing how he thinks about that, it makes it a little bit more difficult, because I think that's so central to the post-pandemic era for the Fed and for central banks around the world, is the fact that, and Neil Kashkari pointed this out, I think most explicitly in his dissent, we are in this environment of successive supply shocks, whether it's war-related, whether it's climate-related. They have been adding to kind of this broader base of inflation pressure, especially in the United States. So it has prevented the Fed from getting to its 2% target. And of course, monetary policy is less effective in those instances versus a demand shock generated environment or dominated environment. But, understanding, I think, how to sort of calibrate policy around that is, that's going to be key moving forward.
But this is the challenge of the Fed, Kevin, and this is like, how does this actually, how is the Fed actually able to drill for more oil or lower prices or create more housing? These are
or
not
regulate AI.
These are not things that the Fed can do.
Yeah, can't print barrels of oil. No, I think that, but when you think about the mandate and the way that the market views this, you think about just the mandate. I mean, nothing is simple about the Fed, but the simplicity of the dual mandate of maximum employment and stable prices, just understanding how they're going to approach policy to get to that point. Because again, at the end of the day, the market is going to price what it thinks the Fed will do, not necessarily what it should do, but probably what it will do. So the more you have that disconnect, the more you get these sort of ruptures. So it's not as if the Fed can sort of solve for some of this inflation that's being generated from this AI capex cycle, for example. I mean, you could sort of argue, and I know some have made the argument that you almost need 2 interest rates right now in a sort of 2-speed economy where you need something a little bit higher probably for business investment, maybe something a little bit lower on the consumer end. Of course, that's not how things work. But when it comes to the mandate and how policy is set, and ultimately, how markets view inflation-fighting credibility, but also labor-saving credibility when it gets to that point, that becomes crucial.
We're already dealing with a K-shaped economy.
There you
I don't
go,
think we need K-shaped interest rates, David.
Kevin Warsh so circumspect about the reaction function, not very circumspect about his desires to remake this institution. Kevin, I want to ask you about what we saw reported in the Times this morning, that he has floated the idea of having fewer meetings than we have in the last few decades, at least. And of course, 4 required by statute here. There can be emergency meetings. But I'm very curious what that means to you, how that would change your work, the work of Wall Street, not having as many opportunities to hear from the Fed on a regular basis, for them not to have these regularly scheduled meetings in the degree they have.
Yeah, well, it's not confirmed yet, so we'll see. Their meeting schedule, at least through 27, has been established. They confirm the meetings and vote on them, at the meeting immediately prior.
Meetings for meetings.
Yes, exactly. So we'll see if it happens. I do think that to the extent you get maybe fewer meetings in a year, and if that maybe results in having to adjust policy in larger increments, then because let's say inflation is still sort of an issue and it's running above target, if they go to a smaller cadence, maybe that creates a little bit of discomfort because it calls into question why reduce the number of meetings if you are just hiking more at your fewer meetings. But again, I mean, we'll see what the inflation backdrop looks like at that point. But no, it does get to this whole, and this has, I think, been known by the market and investors since we knew Kevin Warsh was going to be the new Fed chair, is sort of reshaping and remaking of communications. And this is, another sort of part of that.
Well, Kevin, there have been a lot of critics, especially during the Powell tenure, who said that the Fed just over-communicated and communicated too much with markets and communicated too much with Americans. It's hard for a journalist to say that because we like, hearing this stuff. Are those critics right?
I mean, I think that's always in the eye of the beholder. Me as an analyst and a strategist, I mean, I like to hear from the Fed and how they're thinking about things, especially, I kind of go back to last fall when Governor Waller in particular was very much in the spotlight about his highlighting of, some of the sort of dangers he was seeing in the slowdown in the labor market. And when you kind of rewind back in time, it's not necessarily that he was giving this very explicit forward guidance, but he was letting you know why he was voting the way he was and why he was setting policy or voting to set policy the way that he wanted it to be because of the slowdown in labor. And I think it was a very clear, and now he's sort of shifted to the inflation side because that's more of the dominant issue. I think that's a clear sort of example as to how communication can be helpful and very effective because you get a very good sense of how the different members of the Fed evolve and their thinking about the evolution of the mandates and whether they're dueling or whether one is clearly more of an issue or not. So I'm a fan of communication. I mean, it's always going to, it's up to everybody whether they think it's over communication or not. But I do think it's helpful to have that sort of engagement, maybe not necessarily at the explicit forward guidance level, but in terms of the reaction function, again, in an era where we have more supply shocks than demand shocks, I do think that it's proven to be helpful.
I do wonder, and Kevin, this is a question for you, but you guys as well who've covered this for a long time. When you look at this globally and you look at the Fed possibly curtailing or speaking less or setting the agenda less, does that risk losing the dominance in the conversation if you have someone like ECB or other central banks really being out in front, overly communicating why they're doing these policies? We're just talking about U.S. pulling back from NATO, and that means the U.S. has less influence in NATO. Does the same kind of track in the financial sector?
Well, I think we have to remember also the unique nature of the Fed in having the dual mandate. So for the ECB, it's just inflation. I think that if we were in a situation where the labor market was deteriorating, or when eventually, we'll get to that point again. I mean, that's how cycles go. Labor markets weaken, they strengthen. So I think that the risk, at least for the Fed, could be if we don't have a lot of if there's not as much sort of confidence in when the labor market is deteriorating again and how they're responding to it. Because again, as much as we didn't get information from Warsh and how he's thinking about inflation, we also haven't really heard him talk about the labor market. No. I mean, I think the only thing he's sort of hinted at is related to this AI productivity story, but even within that, it hasn't been this sort of explicit mention of labor. So that, I think, to me, is actually what I'm waiting more for, is how he sort of thinks about that, again, especially when you're dealing with just a very different set of circumstances. So I think that's the unique nature of the Fed versus the ECB, for example.
We have about a minute left, and as I think of other central banks, I think of the BOJ. It made a decision this week, and we saw intervention in the yen. We saw our Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent kind of jawboning the yen as well.
And literally write on a piece of paper in the cabinet meeting that they got a photo of, buy yen.
Just curious, in the minute that we have left, your take on sort of what occurred over here over the last week in Tokyo.
I mean, well, you look at some of the more extreme weakness in it's not just the yen. I mean, the Asian currencies broadly. I mean, the South Korean won has been also one that has weakened considerably. So, a lot of it, I think for Japan, though, it is kind of a little bit of a poster child example of when you have inflation that is running away a bit and a central bank that's been a little bit more hesitant to tighten policy, at a more extreme rate. But of course, I mean, the set of issues that Japan deals with, everything from demographics to debt, is a little different than the U.S. And it's not the first time that the U.S. and Japan have worked together on this. It's been a while in terms of especially the scale of the intervention. But when you look at some of the weakness and why it's happened, it's not sort of terribly surprising, I think, as to why we made that move.
Kevin, great to see you. Thank you for coming in. Kevin Gura of Schwab joining us here on set in New York. Tim Stenovec, host of Business Week Daily on Bloomberg Radio, joining us as well. Thank you.
Hey, I'll see you guys in a few minutes.
Well, sure you will. For the quiz.
Unfortunately, that is true. Kevin, you want to stay around and watch my humiliation on this quiz? Feel free to stick around. All right. Coming up, he's known as the father of the 401k, and he's out with a new retirement plan. What you need to know about Radish. That's coming up next, live on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Tim Stenovec. Let's update you on today's top stories. FIFA President Gianni Infantino has abandoned a controversial plan to create a commercial entity that would have opened the door to outside investors in the World Cup, just days after unveiling the proposal. The reversal comes after Europe's governing football body, UEFA, vowed to boycott the tournament if FIFA went ahead with the plan. UEFA released a statement this morning saying it has lost confidence in Infantino's leadership. Elon Musk is now poorer than he was before the SpaceX initial public offering. The world's first trillionaire saw his wealth peak at $1.3 trillion on June 16th. It now stands at around $684 billion. That's according to the Bloomberg Billionaires Index. Its $600+ billion decline. That's actually more than any other billionaire has ever been worth, other than Elon Musk himself. Former Republican Congressman George Santos has agreed to pay more than $35,000 to settle allegations that he manipulated a wager on the prediction market Kalshi. Santos has been subject to an event contract where users bet yes or no on whether he would attend the State of the Union address. Santos himself placed wagers on both sides of the trade. He also agreed to a 3-year trading ban. Christina and David.
I think if people were betting on whether or not I would show up to events, that was a pretty safe bet that no, I would be at home.
You'd be at home.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
All right. Take note, CFTC. All right. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate it. In a time where saving for retirement is difficult for many, the father of the 401k, Ted Benna, has a brand new project intended to help workers who are not able to pay into retirement accounts or don't have access to them.
That's right. The project is called Radish. It is an employer-funded incentive program that lets companies deposit money into an account for workers who hit performance goals, including safety, tenure, and on-time delivery. Joining us now is financial expert and co-creator of Radish, Ted Benna. Ted, explain to us what this is about and what did you see as the inherent problem with the current state of the 401k?
Well, the problem, Christina, is it's reached a point now where many middle and low-income employees can't afford to have money taken out of their paycheck. And, what with cost of living, housing, education, medical care, food, etc. Even when they have the opportunity, they just can't afford to do it. So, I came up with this new plan, as a way to help middle and low-income employees because it's solely employer funded. And rather than it being a plan that's intended to help 20, 30 years from now, employees can have access to it when they have financial need. So if they need $500 or $1,000 to repair a car to be able to get to work, or for medical expenses, other significant financial needs, they can dip into it and take money to provide for those type of needs.
I mean, that makes sense because, I've been through phases of my life where I thought it really made more sense for me to have the liquidity rather than put it in my 401k because there were bills, there were uncertainties. So there's no penalty when you need to take those funds out?
Well, there will be a 10% penalty like other qualified plans unless it, meets one of the exemptions like, buying a new home,
right?
Education, medical expenses, those types of things. But Christina, what happens is the employer contribution goes in pre-tax. So as a result, neither the employer or the employees pay FICA tax on it. So, that's 7.65%. So if the employee has to take it out and pay the 10% penalty tax, it's not that big a difference. And then in some states, the withdrawal from retirement account may be exempt from state tax.
Yeah.
So in those type of states, the employees actually end up paying, no more or maybe even less tax than if they got paid cash compensation.
I want to ask you to kind of get retrospective if you're willing to, and as you were designing what became the 401k, if the way that it's played out is in line with what you expected. In other words, this is something that I think benefits a lot of Americans who are kind of middle or higher end earners, obviously those who are not able to access it. Is that something that you foresaw or forecasted would happen here? How is the level of access that we've seen, yes, the level of adoption as well, kind of matched with what you anticipated when you were creating that first product so many decades ago?
Well, I think 401k definitely worked the way anticipated. Since its inception, it's probably helped workers accumulate about $15 trillion or so when you count all the money that's been rolled out into IRAs and taken as benefits and so forth. And it played a big role in helping turn lower paid employees from spenders into savers. But we've reached a point now where that's changed, where many just can't afford to have money taken out of their paycheck. They have no assets. They have absolutely nothing. And many of them have negative, credit card debt with high interest rates and, a lot of financial stress that, they have to deal with.
How has the feedback been for this new project? Because it does put the onus, obviously, more on employers. What is the benefit to them for engaging in this kind of product? I know they can reward good behavior, things they like to see from employees. What's the feedback been, and do you think it will get adopted by enough companies to make it viable?
Well, we're getting some employers to adopt it and quite a bit of interest. And trucking industry is one example. And, there, for the drivers, typically what they're interested in is safety, on-time delivery, maybe, for shorter term haulers, one more delivery a week and whatever. So the employer is able to set whatever incentives the employees have to meet in order to get the contributions. And so the benefit to the company is to improve performance, potentially reduce turnover a bit, those types of things. And, for the employees is to give them additional financial security.
I want to go back to something you mentioned a moment ago, which is kind of developing saving habits or becoming a saver. And I'm curious what you've learned over your career about that particular kind of psychology. So obviously the 401k has had an impact on that. People are thinking more seriously, I think, largely about saving for retirement. I know that that's an ambition of this new project as well. Yes, there's an incentive here for employers to have employees who have good habits and do good work. Talk a bit about sort of your thinking when it comes to how you foster a savings psychology in workers today. What works in that regard?
Well, definitely 401k and now the state mandated IRA plans are a big step in that because it requires employees to take money out of their paycheck before they have the opportunity to spend it. And I know for me personally, many younger employees over the years, retirees as well, have said, hey, look, I want to thank you, for making this available, but because I would have never been able to do this on my own if I had to do it without the 401k.
I'm wondering what your advice would be to some people on the younger side. When I got my first full-time job, I remember all the guys in the office, got to max it out. Max out that 401k, the company matches, this will set you up, you got to do it, you got to do it. When I talk now to people in their 20s who do have full-time jobs, they are reticent to pour a bunch of money into something like a 401k because they're just not sure that that program, the system we know it, is going to be there when they need it decades from now. What would you say to them? Is that a safe bet still if you can do it? Or do they have a right to think there's more risk there than there used to be?
Well, the plan is going to be there as far as the money they have put in it. Longer term, Christina, whether things happen to make 401ks be less attractive and for employers to not maintain them, which certainly is a possibility, that wouldn't affect the money that's already been accumulated. So for younger workers, there's no reason for them to be concerned now about the fact that 5, 10, 20 years from now, they may not be able to put money into the plans, have the kind of benefits, going forward that they have now.
Tim Benna, pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much. The father of the 401k joining us here to talk about his latest project. That is Radish. Again, a new way of saving for retirement. Appreciate your time on this Saturday. And fascinating,
really nice
Christina, as you bring
concept.
that up as well. I mean, there are those who are reticent to do it and those who can't do it. I think that's another factor as well here. Just the
100%.
difficulties of this economy making it hard to rationalize saving for retirement when you can't get a house, can't get a car.
Yeah, and I think this is
interest
part
rates
of
are high.
what Ted is trying to address with his new program.
All right, we come back here. I've been waiting for this the whole show, whole week actually. It's the Pointed News Quiz. This is Lisa Mateo's baby, but we have a very capable guest quizmaster, Tim Stenovec, who's going to be running the table. That is coming up here on Bloomberg This Weekend, Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. Well, here we are, Bloomberg This Weekend. Time for the Pointed News Quiz.
I'm feeling very outnumbered and like collusion is about to
Well,
happen.
there's no
but-
collusion. I just want to emphasize that. This is a self-regulated body, but there is no preemptive.
Are we a nonprofit? Should we be a
No.
nonprofit like FIFA?
We're thinking about taking some investment on.
Broad definition of the terms. Tim Stenovec filling in for Lisa Mateo today, quite capably, I must add.
Well, it is the moment. Thank you. By the
You're
way,
welcome.
it's the
All right,
most.
let's
It's the
see if
moment.
he's capable.
It
Stand
is
by.
truly the
Stand
moment
by.
we've all been waiting
Yes,
for.
I agree.
This is the Pointed News Quiz.
Yes.
You can play along at home if you have never played. Just Bloomberg.com/pointed. You can do it on your mobile device or on your computer. Pay attention though, because here's the rules.
What are the rules?
All right, you guys each have 30 chips.
Yes,
Chips?
yes, thereabouts. I feel
You're
like
gonna
I've got fewer,
wager-
but they look like they could be. Don't
You're going to
count.
place your bets on
Yeah.
each category depending on how you really feel about these categories. Here are the categories.
My
You
level
ready?
of confidence in
All
the
right.
categories.
Here are the categories.
I'm interrupt. He doesn't like my interruptions. I can tell.
You're,
He's very.
you're derailing his mojo. Stop it, David.
I just want to make sure we have time to get through
I'm sorry.
this.
Okay, all right, here are the categories.
There's not just categories, but a bonus question too. Okay.
All right, don't tell us that
Gentlemen,
category
don't
yet.
fight. All right,
Online
categories
shopping.
Online shopping.
Sandwiches.
Yep.
Car chargers.
Okay.
Okay.
Car
You're
chargers.
talking like EV chargers or like a charger for my phone in the car?
You'll find out.
Okay.
How's that?
Interesting.
We're actually going to go a little bit out of order, okay?
We are?
Yeah.
That's not how this
No,
game
we're
is
not going to go out of
played.
order. Okay. I kind of want to change it up.
All right. I'm ready.
All right, I'm doing the split across. Oh, you're
Split
really
across.
stacking it up.
I feel confident in my sandwich knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel confident in your sandwich knowledge
I don't
too.
know.
Okay, hit us.
Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
How's
so
it gonna be?
First category?
we're going with.
Online shopping.
Well, let's go with sandwiches, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We're going
Then I got to move that over here.
Okay.
All right, sandwiches.
Excitement, impatience, baby-like wonder, says what spokesman in an ad for the recently IPO'd Jersey Mike's?
Say that one more time.
Wait, what's the question?
Excitement, impatience, baby-like wonder, says what spokesman in an ad for the recently IPO'd Jersey Mike's?
You're asking for his name?
Yeah.
You know, this was a major IPO this week as we saw this
It
kind of
was.
move into consumer IPOs. And
Have you guys been to Jersey Mike's?
I used to go growing up. I haven't been in a long time. You order by number. You pick a sandwich.
Oh, really?
It's a numerical menu.
Okay, what do you have, Christina?
Jersey Mike. I don't know that
Danny
guy's name.
DeVito.
David's right. It's Danny DeVito.
Oh.
There he is. You can see him right there with
Noted.
the CEO
And a Manning brother.
Wait a
of
minute.
Jersey
I
Mike's,
watched Danny
the
Berger's
founder
entire interview
of
on
Jersey
this.
Yeah.
I read 2 articles.
And a
Danny
Manning
DeVito
brother.
was never mentioned.
Can I have 10 of your tokens to give
No,
to Tim?
you don't get them. Tim gets
I
them.
have to hand them over. There you go. All right, well.
Okay,
I
so I
miss
get these
Lisa
now.
so much. Lisa, please
All right,
come
play
back.
along at home, Bloomberg.com/pointed.
All right, what's the next
We're
category?
going online shopping.
Online shopping.
Now we're there.
I've got
If I
10
don't win
I've got
this
10
one,
on
I'm
that.
leaving.
10 on
If
that.
I don't leave this one, I'm leaving.
The online shopping marketplace Vinted.
Okay.
Vinted.
Can you spell that? Can you spell that for me?
Vinted, V-I-N-T-E-D.
Okay.
Vinted.
Like vented with an I.
Exactly.
Like vintage.
It's expanding into the U.S. and mulling an IPO. What type of product is sold
Oh, crap.
on Vinted?
Just gave you the answer.
Vinted?
Vinted.
Like Vin Diesel, vintage. All right. I think I'm going to go with that.
Okay.
I love hearing the music.
Christina says
It's like used secondhand clothing.
used clothing.
Vintage clothing.
It's not all vintage. It's like secondhand fashion stuff, purses,
I'm going to accept that as a
bags.
correct answer.
Wow.
Okay, thank you.
David, vintage clothing.
Yeah.
Secondhand clothing is.
All right, excellent.
I gave you the answer.
This is great.
Well,
I was going to say, you
kind of did as
gave
you
it
spelled
away.
it out through the course of this. Vinted. Tell me more about it.
Vinted.
Is it
Okay.
popular?
Yeah, it's Europe's largest online clothing resale market. Do you know about this?
Yeah, and they're really popular because they don't charge a fee to the seller. So you can sell your clothes and get more money for them. Because anybody who's tried to secondhand resale online, you get hardly anything for it, and you get more if you list on Vinted. So
Are
it's
you
very
a thrifter?
popular. Very much
You
so.
do?
Yeah, I buy a lot of secondhand
Have you
stuff.
found one in the city yet that you
Yeah, I found a
enjoy?
couple.
Okay,
Found a
you don't have to
couple.
reveal them on here.
This was founded in 2008 in Lithuania, and it's processed $12.3 billion worth of secondhand clothing just
Yeah,
last year.
It's a big deal.
Men's clothing and women's?
I think so.
I don't know. Is it?
I think
All
so.
right, stay tuned next week.
Usually,
Get
I mean,
back to them.
Yeah, usually it's easier to.
I'll find you boys some blazers. Don't worry.
Okay. All right, third question.
All right.
I bet nothing on this, so I'm just going
Car
to enjoy my
chargers.
massive
What are we
lead that I
doing?
have.
You guys are
Car
tied.
chargers.
You guys are tied 1-1.
No way. I bet
I-
20 on that first
I feel
one.
like I get half a point for his because I gave him the answer.
All right. Well, you guys can keep track of the math.
Yeah.
Car chargers.
What
you got?
retailer
Okay.
was second only to Tesla in expanding its EV charging network in the second quarter? It's also the nation's largest grocer.
Oh.
I do know this one.
Nation's largest grocer.
Maybe I shouldn't have given that for a clue.
It's okay. I had it anyway.
I don't know about that. Good thing I didn't bet any chips on it. I wrote Kroger.
Walmart.
Christina's right.
Oh, well,
Walmart is betting
congratulations.
its investment in EV ports
Kroger.
reduce sales inside its stores since drivers need something to do while their cars are charging.
Yes.
Walmart is creating one of the country's largest EV charging networks, nearly 350 stations spread among its 4,600 stores.
I knew it was the largest grocer.
I guess we have time for a bonus.
We have time.
I don't need it, but
we have time for a bonus.
We're tied.
All right, it's
you
effort not.
pretentious
I have
maniac.
30. You have 20. I have 30.
All right. Okay.
All right, F1.
For our radio
F1
listeners,
is the category. All right.
F1.
Which country will host Formula One for the first time in 9 years after agreeing to take on Bahrain's postponed Grand Prix? What's it going to be?
I don't know. I really don't know.
It's going to be called.
Is this really a
Is it
hint?
the UAE?
What
I'm
am
not
I
gonna
a
give you a
hint?
hint.
Okay, I wrote
UAE.
Saudi Arabia.
Oh, okay. Neither of you got it right. That's good. It's Malaysia.
Malaysia.
Oh.
They'll be hosting the event. It's going to be called Bahrain Grand Prix in Malaysia. It was postponed due to disruption caused by the war in the Middle East. Malaysia actually hosted F1 races for 19 seasons, but grew tired of the expensive staging fees and falling tickets.
They are
this time.
expensive.
I
Bahrain is
remember
actually
there used to be a
paying for it this
race
time.
in Malaysia
Yeah,
because
back in
I
the
watched
day.
the Netflix show back in the day.
Tim Stenovec, thank you very much. Happy to win 3 weeks in a row. David Gura winning pointed
You know
with Tim Stenovec in the
what?
hot seat. You can test your knowledge on
I
all
had
10
to be
questions.
a very good sport when my winning streak was going on.
Take the Pointed News quiz at Bloomberg.com/pointed on the Bloomberg Business app. It is available as well.
Thank you for joining us.
Better luck next week.
I think. Thank you, Tim, mostly.
Yes, thank you, Tim.
Tomorrow, more of our exclusive interview with the heads of the National Governors Association. We hope you'll join us starting at 7 a.m. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Gura with Tim Stenovec.